not equal. And that's not the case with any religion. I don't think like any religion actually says that interacting with another human beings in a different level, that they are something different. So I think it's more sort of like a culture which mixes up with the religion, and then ultimately it's just like we see very apparent example in the world that the people go to the extreme that literally not just about the talking bit, but they started going and killing willy-nilly and all that kind of thing. But in my opinion and experience, I think it's more sort of like a cultural bit which kind of like keeps us apart.
Hmm. So I just want to say again, I've got an interesting rant to do today, and I can do it at any point. It's related to Ukraine, so we can get into it probably near the start. But before, I don't want to hog the mic, um, especially at the front of the. I'd love to hear anyone else with a story that they found, or a point, or an article, or a headline related to Ukraine, as we've done the last several days. Um, Anyone with a Ukraine-related story or Russia-related story?
Yeah,
Sure.
the
Yeah.
the West is kind of like the CNN actually did the story on it that they are like kind of the West is getting agitated by how he actually dealt with, and now he's like asking for like sending more military and all that kind of thing. Um, and ultimately, like I mean, West is there, but now I think America is feeling that he's probably just gone around too much, asking for too much support. And it was kind of like a weird story in this all the midst of it. The CNN actually had to do this um, story on this that he's asking for too much and blaming Europeans that they haven't come forth for fully supporting the whole fighting back element. So that's he's not standing up anymore in that CNN coverage.
Your
Okay.
mate, David Sachs, well, I'd say that is your mate, I know it's not necessarily, but the all-in chaps, let's say, some of them, have been sharing and peddling this this story. I think, like Karam is saying, is that somehow, and I think this is entirely predictable, is that somehow Zelensky has now overstepped his heroic mark because what he's really showing them is the ludicrousy of a piece of paper not protecting those people. And I think that the penny is dropping that, quite frankly, that he is going to get left twisting in the wind. And I think people are getting themselves comfortable with the fact that they've allowed for, they want the best and their thoughts and prayers, but like you say, he's overstepped the mark somehow by drawing America and NATO into this World War III. So there's been a very strong pushback against Zelensky. He's a hero, but he would be even more of a hero if he'd give up, type of thing. That's the right thing to do. He's going to get annihilated, so give up anyway, which seems to be a strong narrative I've seen over the last few days, which doesn't surprise me, but I think some people were expecting that,
Hmm.
Zelensky would last longer as a hero rather than being now scapegoated for standing up to what was always going to be, a potential slaughter. The only question was, would he be encouraged in leading his lambs to the slaughter by the West, which is a story you're seeing out of that group of people. So I just think it's interesting because, of course, we called it weeks ago when it started that this would be the likely outcome, or at least I was
There's
trying
a
not to be depressing, but yeah,
Yeah,
that was the
there's a
point.
bunch of interesting potential outcomes that I've not heard anybody discuss. I'll just name a few. One is it's not entirely impossible that Ukraine comes out of this, uh, and Russia retreats with its kind of tail between its legs in some capacity. Oh, by the way, there's some really interesting developments
What
around.
makes you feel that?
Why do I think it's possible that Ukraine doesn't crack under Russia's pressure?
No, it's more the other way around. Given that Russia has unlimited firepower that it can throw at the problem, and in inverted commas, and that it has done this in other conflicts,
Yeah.
and they are threatening it, why do you think Russia will fold their hand? That's
Uh-huh.
really the question.
Oh, different question.
Yes,
Yeah.
because
Because
if
all
I
the
can just,
sanction will make it impossible for them to continue this. The thing is, the heat is
You had a phone call.
Okay. who was trying to jump in there?
I
Oh, that
just
was
quickly on this particular point,
Oh, Term,
just a
some
quick
lady's
comment.
trying to jump in. Let the lady go
Sure,
first.
sure, sure. Go ahead.
oh, sorry, that's actually me, Tyler. No, I was thinking about what Nicholas said and how Zelensky is, of course, going to get to a point where NATO sort of has to push back because the only way for Ukraine to win this war if they get NATO actually involved. And NATO is kind of threading the line. They're doing everything they can except getting into it because they don't want to get into a war. So for Zelensky, it doesn't really matter what NATO thinks of him in the end because he knows the only sure way for Ukraine to not. I mean, Russia can go on forever. They will take it all at once or they will just do it step by step like they have been doing now after they failed initially. But the only way for Zelensky to win against Russia in the end is to get NATO involved. So it doesn't really matter how much pushback he gets from NATO in the end because it doesn't really matter. He has to get them into war to win, and if they don't, he's going to lose anyways.
Yeah,
I
there's
think the issue with him is two things real quick. Issue is the public pleading. I think I think it's all right for him to pursue it, but if you have a legacy of strong people, eventually the pleading they don't like. That's what I'm hearing in closed door discussions with people I know. Though they want NATO, but they don't want to be perceived as begging. Um, so just fight and they'll come along. The other thing is nuclear update. I don't know if you guys checked Barron's and some of the other things. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, a watchdog, said that the data that they were receiving from Chernobyl has now been cut off. And Tyler, I linked on Twitter on that to Tech News. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a few things that got raised there. One is that Russia did eventually retreat from Afghanistan, just as America did in some sense, because Afghanistan cleverly figured out how to withstand years of punishment. And Ukraine might as well. And Ukraine has something that Afghanistan didn't do, which is the whole world watching on TikTok. So, and applying all of these economic sanctions that are likely to turn Russia into the next North Korea at the rate that we're going. So there's going to be tremendous pressure that Russia's going to feel that they didn't feel in Afghanistan, for just as an example. And I believe the will of the Ukrainians is such that the Ukrainians won't fold. And that's evident by any of the interviews that you see when the journalists ask, how long do you think it will take for the Russians to reach topple Kyiv? And the response is never. They will never take Kyiv. And I challenge you to look those people in the face and tell them they're wrong. That I have never seen such determination, like non-bluff. That is to use a poker, those people are not bluffing. You will have to kill all of them, including the women.
But but they're holding a 7 and a 2,
That's fine.
unfortunately.
That's fine.
And they're going to get, if you get pulled all the way, you're going to be
Right.
shown to be
But
holding a 7 and a 2, and you're going to
what?
lose all your money. And
But with
that's,
that,
that's really the point.
that's fine. The point I'm making is because of their will to fight to the death, you are going to have to commit a genocide against them.
Right.
That's exactly what I've been worried about since day one, is that
I think
that's exactly what's going to happen, barring some sort of deal that gives the Russians what they want. That's really where we're at,
right.
Give
I
them
think
what
that's
they
what
want,
I
hand
believe
them your country is what they're being told. Neutrality, Donetsk, Lugansk, and the Crimea go to Russia, and you sign a deal to be neutral, and you, Zelensky, are going to have to eat it. So the way I see it is the narrative is changing against Zelensky, that he's leading them down a blind alley, and that he should be, litigating for peace and not riling them up to almost certain death. I'm just saying what I'm seeing.
I have to assume that there was a Ukrainian military leader, for lack of a better word, in eastern Ukraine who took to social media yesterday to give an update of the dire situation that he's in the east of Ukraine, where no doubt, he's fighting in the Donbass region where it's, a whole lot of Russian sympathizing Ukrainians there, right? So he probably has it worst of all. And he says we're surrounded. We are surrounded, and I'm doing this message because I've done the calculus, and we only have a few days of food and water remaining. They have us surrounded, so unless there's a no-fly zone implemented and we get backup and resources, we're going to die of starvation. He says. Did you see that one? Right?
Yeah.
And and my point is, you could again. That's another example of a guy who's not bluffing, and he's ready to
This is
die.
the playbook from Putin. I mean, they did this. This is their playbook. You know, they
Right.
encircle and then
Yeah.
they starve you out.
As I said, it would be. So I'm aware that that's the playbook, and I even said before the invasion happened, or on the first day of the invasion, like, watch, this is the strategy they're going to implement, and they are implementing now. And I said before the invasion ever began that the Ukrainians, if an invasion happens, will fight at a time when that was not clear. And I said with 100% certainty, I've been there. I've seen it in their face. I've asked the question to their face, and it was abundantly clear. They will fight to the death. And I said that in the room before the invasion happened. So my point is, I'm telling you now, I've been there. I've talked with the people. They are going to fight to the death, even if it means a genocide. They're not going to cave at any point. And they will turn this into an Afghanistan-like scenario if they have to, which they will continue to survive even if Kyiv falls, and even if Russia brings in, by the way, this is America's dream scenario, that it turns into this, that Russia falls into this snake pit of endless Afghanistan-like resource draining of Russia, where they have to bring in, and by the way, the war analysis have done the math. Russia's going to have to bring in 500,000 soldiers to keep Ukraine under control. 500,000.
Yeah.
So Tyler, there's
It's
a
not good.
And I
By the
think,
way, but here's the
and
other thing is the Ukrainians, including that guy who said we're 48 hours away from starvation, said we have the world is on our side. And he's correct.
Watching them starve. Yeah,
Right.
they're
He
on
said,
their
yeah,
side, observing that
right.
entire.
So my point is, you could feel that he knew the world was on his side, and that's partly why he is able to die on the sword, because he knows he's doing. And I believe that the Ukrainians are even a bit pleasantly surprised at the outpouring of support from around the world. I think everybody is.
But
And
if you're existentially at risk, I don't think you can be pleasantly surprised when everyone's watching you, just saying, "Oh,
true,
we're on your side, guys,"
true,
but
true,
they're
true, true.
literally dying.
Right, I get
but
that.
I think, Nicholas, like Tyler is saying, Afghanistan style, it is one thing to just bombard the city with air support, but when you get to city, urban warfare is a whole different story.
Exactly.
That the US has learned the hard way that if people have the will, it is impossible. If you don't have, the buy-in from locals, they know the terrain, they know the city, they could just sit in even
Yeah, you're going
a
to have an
bunker.
insurgency. Yes, absolutely. You're going to live with an
And
insurgency.
Russia, just to add into this, Russia hasn't been good at that. Even if you look at Syria, for example, they were just supporting air support. It was the Syrians who did the urban city to city, door to door, Aleppo destroying of urban center. And Ukraine is what, 42 million people, which is equivalent to Afghanistan, close to a 40 million. So you can't really defeat a population that's really bent to hell to get rid of you if they know their city, if they know their caves, if they know the things, and that you don't know where you're going, they could just hide in a bunker and then just destroy you. And it's not that
Okay,
simple
so
when
let's
it comes.
assume that carries on. So I don't disagree, by the way, that this is what's going to happen. I just saying that we're all standing there watching first the heroes. Now they're saying, okay, come on, let's stop playing around, do a deal, which is what the right wing commentators like David Sachs are doing, and saying, the best leader does a deal here, and then if he does a deal, then they're going to have to live by that. If they don't do a deal, then you're going to have an insurgency that's going to last for a very long time. And that doesn't really suit the West, because what they want is this to be over so they can take the sanctions off and get the economy back on track and the supply chain back on track. They want it to be over. So when are we going to go from, thoughts and prayers and sympathy and he's the bad guy to you're going to lose, or you people are going to get wiped out, do a deal, and then we can all go back to to this, and all those lives were just frittered away. That's what I think will happen, no doubt.
How about even especially the way it's going now, Russia just getting some kind of symbolic ramp up so that they can actually bend as well. Why would Ukraine give some of their territories to please the West? I mean, especially now they are winning a little bit, they're resisting a ton, and that now once the air bombardment is over and it becomes cities, face-to-face warfare, then they are in a better position
I
actually to
think
do
that's a
negotiation.
narrative, Messi. That's the problem, is that it's a narrative that these brave partisans are having any effect. It's just a question, as it's always been, how much pressure Mr. Putin wants to apply, and is the man sane or insane? If he's insane, no, everyone's terrified of an acceleration into World War III. If he's sane, he's just learning and testing that we will not come to their aid, and he will be able to take what he wants to take. The question is, how bad of an exile does he want to have in the global community, and how long will they actually hold him as a pariah? That's really the next step of the question.
The big assumption in what I actually said this, that it has to be run as a guerrilla warfare. That's the only way that Ukrainians can actually sort of take back the country. But there is a huge dependency in any guerrilla war, is who is going to keep the supply chain open. Is the West prepared to sort of like get the things over across the border, or the border is going to be porous? If the Kiev is like totally surrounded by, and all the entry points is being surrounded by the people, by the military, then this will, how long is going to last? Yes, they have a great will. They have everything in terms of the actual, fighting back. But 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 6 months down the line, if they don't have, this middle of the winter or something scenario, and they don't have the food, then, and they are not able to actually feed their kids, and they're crying and all those kind of things, this will goes down. So, and yes, there are going to be few people in the top tier who are going to say, no, this is our country, we're going to fight back and all that. But when kids start to cry, you are in a very difficult situation. I mean, you just like submit. That will is there, but that gets shattered. So you have to look at it from the perspective that if the war is going to go on like it did in Afghanistan, does those people have like a strong will all the way to fight this war for like 3 years, 5 years, God knows how long? So the supply chain is the key in any of those kind of scenarios.
Look at Stalingrad. This is actually, that Ukrainians were a great part of the fight in Stalingrad during the Second World War, and they were cut off like 1.5 year, and still did beat the bloody Germans.
And I think it's sorry. I was just gonna say I think it's more realistic to try to figure, how far off he miscalculated, rather than, is he insane or not? Because I think it's very clear that he's not insane. Why wouldn't he level the place? Because he's trying to do an insurgency. Like it's way more difficult. So I think the question is like how far off he miscalculated, and
That's a great
if we think about that, he
because
probably will back off.
fundamentally, he doesn't want to torch it to the ground because he wants to take it over in a way.
Exactly.
Right. And they're saying, no, no, no. If you're going to take it over, you're going to have to torch this fucker to the ground. I'm not leaving this
Right.
house unless you burn it to the fucking ground.
Right, which is
Right.
why I said like it's an insurgency. Like he's probably not going to, because of their willpower. And in Piotr's room, like we literally had somebody who's there on the ground. Like like you said, Tyler, their willpower. It's like she didn't even wait for the question to finish before she said, "Oh, we're fighting." Like there's no question, we're winning this.
Well,
Like their willpower is unreal.
there's another huge dynamic shifting as we speak, which is this. The BBC just did a video yesterday of inside Moscow on the ground. And I shared it in our little back channel chat. And I want to pin it to the top of the room. You really have to see this. Where did it go? There it is, right here. And Carl Bildt, who's the former Prime Minister of Sweden, who's actually quite loved, who, by the way, used to pop into Clubhouse, by the way, shared this on his Twitter account. So I'm pinning Carl's tweet because it's a link to the BBC video. There it is. So click on Carl's tweet at the top of the Clubhouse room. It goes to this BBC video. BBC News came out yesterday, Women's Day, and it shows people roaming around Moscow like yesterday. And they ask people in Moscow, by the way, the police are there scanning everybody's phones, seeing what they're saying, because they're trying to control the narrative. And then the BBC asks these two women, what do you think about what's going on? And they say, well, we support Putin 100%. In fact, 200%. And we tell our kids this is the right thing. And he's fighting the good fight. And he's standing up for the Russians who are being, attacked in Ukraine. And, this totally bizarre narrative. And because he has such control of the narrative in Russia, all independent media has been exercised, kicked out, kind of the classic China playbook. And now there's a punishment for 15 years if you even say anything that's counter to the official narrative. So they've got a really good grip on the narrative in mainland Russia, and that's why you've got reportedly 50% of people by statistics support Russia. Again, it's just a stat. But the sanctions, the shutting down of McDonald's, which just happened, and Coca-Cola, and Yum Brands, and 1,000 KFCs, and Pizza Huts, and Burger Kings, and the biggest shopping mall in Russia where you have H&M, and IKEA, and Puma, and Zara, and Tommy Hilfiger, and all of them are shutting down. All of them. McDonald's very notably, and Coke and Pepsi, all of that sends a message to Russians that you're being lied to. If the narrative that you're being fed is true, why is your shopping malls shutting down? Why is your credit cards not working? Why is every notable big brand in your country leaving? If
But
the narrative
Tyler,
you're being
I do
fed is true.
believe that leads to the Putin's speech, or should I say, line of thinking, where it's like, oh, the Americans want to control us, or the
Yeah.
It's
NATO
even
wants to
American.
control everything that we have.
It's
It's
not even
because
American.
most of these
Hold
countries,
on. Hold
no,
that.
most of these companies are American leaning, right? LVMH, Korean, even though they're
DMH
European
is French.
conglomerates. Yeah, I said they're European conglomerates, right? But at the same time, that's NATO. That's the NATO alliance. They want these things to happen. So anything that's allied, and this was where my question was
Hold
going to
on.
be, which was,
Hold on.
yeah, no worry.
37% of the tobacco market in Russia is Japanese. They just pulled out. Cars,
Yeah.
you have these are multinational companies from all around that are pulling out. This isn't uniquely an American or uniquely European pulling out of Russia. It's an international thing. So his ability to say, this is the Americans or the Europeans, and they're crazy because they don't understand what's going on in Ukraine, that just doesn't add up anymore. At some point, the Russians are going to realize we're being lied to because they get on VPNs. They're starting to figure it out. My point is that figuring out phase is happening right now. The mainland Russians are figuring out right now that they're being lied to. And once they figure it out, which they're going to figure it out, then he's in deep shit. And it's going to take time for them to figure it out. And he knows once they figure it out, he's in really deep shit. That's why he's so paranoid about controlling the narrative.
Tyler, can somebody propose when was the last time a civilian coup was set forth? I'm going back to France. It's not very common. People keep just we try, right? That's some of the logic, and I think, like a lot of people in the room, your point is taken, but there's only one person with a megaphone. He's very effective with censorship, and he's got decades, over a generation of psyops, right? Cultural psyops. So I'm sorry, I try to keep up with history, but what 20th century or 19th century example are we pointing to that the civilians are going to have a coup on a despot like this? I'm serious. I'm being serious.
No, it's a great question. I applaud the question. That's a fantastic question.
Sudan.
Yeah, the
Arabian
Warsaw Ghetto
Spring count?
was an attempt, and you saw what happened there.
I mean, does Arabian Springs, those kind of thing count?
Exactly. The Tunisia actually it was all catalyzed with one guy burning himself. Remember in 2011 when
Exactly.
it started, that he said, "Look, you guys, I can't do this anymore," and then blow up himself, which was really bad. But the entire country came up and
You
rise
could
up
say
and got
Syria.
rid of.
Yeah.
No, that was Tunisia, and then they got rid of Ben Ali. That was the despot that, and they elected a civilian. Even recently, as close as Sudan, even though the military is resisting, they are at it. They got rid of Al Bashir, and there was a vacuum for a while, and the military is equipping and saying, "Well, we can help you," and they are saying, "No, we need a civilian." So it does happen, and I know that Libya and others didn't go well with the even Egypt. It's the civilian that got rid of Hosni Mubarak. Remember in 2011, that
It's
that guy resisted
But
so
those
Wait,
things
much.
there
don't
are
last, though,
countries
right?
outside of Europe? Really?
They don't last. But if you look
Syria.
at all those nations, they're going to have Arab. Sorry, it's Haman. So they're going to have Arab Spring too now because Tunisia's gone. It's not doing great. Egypt is bad, worse off than it was before. All the nations who supposedly had Arab Spring are now realizing that it's pretty much the old establishment that just took it over, based on the just a change. That's all it was, just a symbolic change. And I think one thing we're forgetting is what's the goal of all this? If we want peace, that's the ultimate goal, right? People not dying anymore. And I think people are just talking about, oh, we need to crush Russia, we need to crush. But you also think of the repercussions in the long term. Remember freedom fries? How the Americans did not like the fact that the French did not join Iraq War? Remember they like suddenly like went all crazy on French products? Imagine now the Russians and the rest of the world who's seeing all this, right? Go against like the West saying, "Look, we don't need this anymore." How like people remember. Like that's why I think the sooner this thing is sort of nipped and brought to at least to the diplomatic tables than on the blood and deaths of Ukrainians, like it's basically a de facto war. I mean, this is like surrogate war. People are playing games. And Charlie, you brought up Afghanistan. Afghanistan was basically a war between America and Russia. It was not between Afghanistan and the invaders or this. It was basically a war between external parties that were using that land because they didn't want any war on their land. And Afghanistan's worse off for it. And we know now, I mean, we know from the Women's Day yesterday that women have gone back from all the gains that have made, right? Afghanistan was it's a beautiful place before it all happened. All this came about because of all these external forces trying to gain control of the internal resources. Like, look back at why Nord Stream 2 was backed, was not backed. If you look at it, Ukraine and Poland were going to lose big time by Nord Stream 2 coming online. Guess who was going to win? Germany. Germany was going to gain a lot of funds from Nord Stream 2. So this is a huge play that people are not realizing. I think the sooner that it's brought to the table of diplomacy, the better for the Ukrainian people. Because this is going to actually cause more further repercussions for people. There's going to be scarring. A lot of people are going to be scarred by this around, like not only Russia, Ukraine, but around the world. People are going to see this and say, look, like right now, Yemen, Ethiopia, Sudan, Syria, all these places are having so many like far greater repercussions from their wars, and they're not seeing it. And so there's going to be a lot of jading between all these people talking about Ukraine and everything. Ukraine is bad, okay? I'm not backing it down. But the thing is, people are forgetting the fact that why these things are started, who's stoking it, and who keeps stoking it. Like, look at the background information. We're group thinking this to the extreme, and we're doing the people of Ukraine and any people who are impacted by these conflicts a huge disservice by missing that part. It's all these are on their lives, on their blood, on their futures, on their kids' memories. I mean, seriously, war is devastating. Okay, I'm telling you this as a refugee from a civil war. It has long-lasting impacts. And it has long things. So you guys have to be thinking of the goals. And I think we're forgetting that. Like we're talking about all these other stuff, but at the end of the day, the sooner this is brought to like at least a ceasefire or something, the better. This is all rhetoric. And even like if you look at that, there's this one video. I know if I was to put it out there, I'll be canceled immediately, right? But there are videos out there that even talks about the fact that there are war plans in place. There are scenarios in place that people would love to enact right now.
Of
Love
course.
to
Yep.
pull off the shelves and act it. Like especially like the biological weapons scenario, whatever. Like these have been there. And that's what we need to look at and be worried and watch out for those people. Because they're the ones who will take us into war. Just one false flag. Remember Kuwait and the baby cribs? Remember that. Don't forget that. That's what took us into to Iraq war. Kids being thrown from what do you call it? Cribs.
I think
from the incubator,
I'm gonna push
Incubators.
back
Right.
I
a
think
bit,
it
Heyman.
was all a lie from the beginning.
hang on
And
a
so,
second.
Heyman, please tell me one thing. Are you talking about war in Afghanistan from 2001 onwards to 2021? There was a war between USA and Russia. I am very surprised about this history lesson because the true core of it, of course, is that it started with this, with Brzezinski standing and at the border and shooting. There's a famous photo of Brzezinski in the
Yeah.
direction because the Russians were there first, of course. But then we had 9/11, you remember probably. And if you say loud here that all this Afghanistan war, which cost billions and billions, was between Russia and USA, I would be really very surprised. Please repeat whether
No.
you mean
Well,
this.
right. Because I
Can I
think we had to
come?
look at the 2000. You had to go back into the 70s, though, right? Sorry,
Yeah,
Messer.
but we were not
But you have to go
involved.
back way back in the 70s, though. You have to look in the 70s, though, right? This is like really. I'm not the expert. Again, I'm just
That's
a.
what I said.
I'm
It
not.
began with
I'm
the Russian,
right.
definitely. Brzezinski in the Cold War, definitely. But from 2001 onwards, it was about 9/11,
Right.
right or
Right.
wrong?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
then I'm content. Thank you.
Right. But before we have to look all the way in the 70s too. That's when the the whole thing was started up with the Mujahideen and supports for all. Again, this
I
is all
think
getting
there's a
into the
different
weeds.
era
This is all getting
that
into the
Heyman,
weeds.
you're
Right. Exactly. It's
entering
getting
into
into the weeds a
different
bit.
eras, and there's a different leadership,
Um,
This,
etc.
this
I think
Alan,
that
I think
Messi
you
had a
have
point
to
though.
look at the whole picture here, meaning if this isn't just going back to the 1970s, no matter what country we're talking about, you've got to go back a couple hundred, even 1,000
Yeah.
years to appreciate the tensions and the changing of perceived borders on these countries to be able to talk about these things, because we're all just coming into the conversation, but you have to look at this at a longer view. And this is why there's tensions. This is why the Russian Federation feels that they're entitled to different lands and other countries. In Afghanistan, no one has been able to subjugate that area. You even go back to the 19th century with the Brits. They lost even then. So again, more of a longer view than just even the past 50 years. We're really shortchanging
Yeah.
the geopolitics in these areas.
Oh, I
Can I
agree.
jump
Well,
in there? I'd like
last
to.
week we
I
talked about
First of all,
borders.
Clinton DeVoe, contributor
Hold
to the
on,
Ottawa
Robert.
Hill Times.
Clinton, hold on a second.
Yeah,
Restart if you would, Clinton. Go ahead.
yeah. Clinton DeVoe, contributor with the Ottawa Hill Times, as well as Troy Media in Canada and Talk Radio. Look, I fundamentally disagree with multiple points that I've just heard, a little bit that I've heard in relation to Ukraine and Afghanistan and some of these other things. The reality is this, is that Ukraine, whether people like it or not, is a small but attempting to become a growing democracy. And this nonsense that, Russia has its wishes or aspirations and it thinks it has its rights to land, that's all nonsense. This is not a battle of left versus right. It's not a battle of liberal versus conservative or Scandinavian socialism versus American free market libertarianism. This is literally a battle of democracy versus authoritarianism. That's what this is about. And the people of Ukraine have chosen democracy. And so for anyone to say, well, we have to look at the deeper, bigger issues that go back further in the past, that's all nonsense. Because we're not talking about the 1960s, or the 1700s. We're talking about the year 2022. And over the last 15 years, Ukraine has decided that it wants to be a democracy. The people of Ukraine have decided that. So we can either support democracy or we can turn its back on democracy. And lastly, this nonsense that Ukraine has to come to the table and negotiate a peace. This is the most ridiculous, asinine thing I've ever heard. And the reason I say that is because imagine you walk into your home and a thief breaks into your house, holds you at gunpoint, and then your neighbor says to you, you should negotiate a peace with the robber
That's
holding a
exactly
gun to
what
your
you should
head.
do because you
Because
don't
that's
want to
what Russia
die.
has done. Russia has waged an illegal war and an invasion on a democracy. And I can't believe that we have
Wait, are we
people, and
saying
I'm a guy that
we're not
writes
paying
No,
attention
about
to
this stuff, and I
history?
can't believe how the public has been misled by Moscow propaganda on this. It's
it's so
absolutely
again,
ridiculous.
You're
but you
wrong.
are
You're
burning. Like this is
actually
the thing. You're not
categorically wrong.
allowing. You're basically sorry, Damlair. It's just that you. This is what exactly. This is the same rhetoric, right? We need to be careful of this. Like you are basically silencing anyone who wants to have a certain point. This basically the whole point of social audio
No,
is to
democracy
allow. No,
is
no,
not
hold on,
rhetoric.
Clinton,
Democracy is
hold
not
on. You
rhetoric.
just no,
An
no, no. But you are
authoritarian
actually putting a
regime
caps. You are actually
invading
quickly
a
putting caps
foreign
down. You
democracy,
You're
Guys
not
are talking
listening.
over
okay,
each
I
other.
thought
is
you.
not
I thought you
rhetoric.
were for
That's
democracy,
actually
Heyman.
what's
Like,
happening
what's
on
it?
the ground.
Yeah, Heyman, I agree with you. How could you ever ignore history? That's how you get somewhere. And second off, what do you mean in illegal warfare? It's this is yeah. If my neighbor came in and took over my home and I wanted peace, we would negotiate. They have the gun at my head. We would
Exactly.
negotiate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that
So
example
it's
was
I don't know what you
that
mean by
was
illegal
not a good
war.
So
example.
I
So
think
yeah.
Clinton is making a very valid point though, and this was the point that was made in this room at the very beginning. We're going to, we're rapidly moving through the different stages of the game, and at this stage of the game, both people on the right and people on the left are saying to this sovereign nation, it's time to negotiate because they can now see that they're either going to be faced with certain destruction because they are going to be willing to do or die and fight to the death, and the Russians are not going to stop because it's not the Russians, it's Putin. So
Right.
everyone's now come to the understanding that this is one man,
There you go.
so it's not an authoritarian regime, it's
Correct.
a lunatic who has invaded on the basis of an illegitimate plan. And the Ukrainians are learning, this is fitness versus truth, this is what you say versus what you do, is that there's a lot of people wishing them well, but now those people that were wishing them well and were fating them as heroes are saying, don't be foolish, you're going to certain death. Now the issue is, how bad will Putin look in forcing his hand, and how far will they be encouraged to sue, as they say, for peace? This was always going to be the way for all of the
Nicholas, wait,
running 24 hours rooms. This is the final analysis. We're in the end game, and the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going
wait,
to go to
are we
certain
in the
death
end
over a
game,
very long
Nicholas?
time? Well,
Nicholas,
it's,
are we?
we know what's going to happen. When I say the end game, it's been predictable from the beginning that we weren't going to stand up to Putin. Therefore, Putin can ratchet up the heat.
hold
And the
on.
question is,
Wait a minute. I
when
We
don't
have
think
stood
that's.
up to
But
Putin.
also, Nicholas, there's a bunch
with
of
all due
statements. Wait, let me
oh,
finish. Can
sorry,
I just
Jennifer.
finish really quickly? Which is one, I don't think we can attribute to his mental state that he's a lunatic. I don't. I mean, stuff like that, or that he's insane, or anything else. I mean, he's very sane. Two, we can't attribute to
yeah, I
what's
don't.
there's
I
a
think a
lot of
lunatic is
background
slightly
back to
different.
history going on here. There's a lot of history going on here, and yes, he did. He does not think that the U.S. is going to come over. He thought that we're weak at this time, or that we have our own messes. But I don't think we are in the end game here in any state. And as you're saying, there's a lot of different politics in 2022 than there were in earlier ones. But there's still a history here. And again,
Well, Jen,
supply
let's game
chains
it
and
out. Let's game
how
it
this
out.
affects how this affects.
So
Pardon?
Let
How
her
this
Hey,
let
affects
her
the
I want
entire
to just game it
world.
out with. I just want to game it out with Jennifer because I'm not saying that it's the end game and it's going to end now. I'm saying we know that there are options on the table. The options on the table are a fight to the death. And the question, when I say lunatic, I'm using flowery language. I think it could be a tactic that he's pretending to be insane, the mad dog tactic. It could be that he's seeded this rumor that he's terminally ill, so therefore it means that he's got nothing to lose. So we understand that we are dealing with a man with a vision, and that he's inculcated 50% of his people with propaganda that effectively means he has a mandate. And we have seen the abdications, or the quiet ascension, or the quiet recognition that certain people are not going to stand up. Certain nations are going to say, we have our own history with you, and we're going to sit this one out. We've seen that happen. And so we're in a position where it's Putin versus the Ukrainians, with the help of the Western economic system putting economic pressure on Mr. Putin and his people. So if we're agreed that those are the conditions precedent, what do you think is the end? When I say the end game, it seems to me that we're either in a protracted fight and we continue to be distant from Mr. Putin and his regime and those who have sat silently, or we see an insurgency that drags out
and
for a very long
so wait,
time.
Nicholas, I'm going to add one more factor there, and I know nothing about war, so I don't know how this is going to play out. Yes, it's an economic war, and I think there are more levers to pull here. I think that the disinformation campaign is not necessarily going to be as protracted as he would like. I think that they're still on the internet, and I also there are so many wild cards out there, as we said, that could happen right now if someone pulls a trigger. So someone could pull a cyber attack, and we aren't able to attribute who it is from. And there have been plenty of acts of espionage that were state sponsored that weren't attributed in past years. So we might use that as some sort of justification. But you're right, we don't seem to want to get involved. And Putin right now is, as a single person, the most powerful person on the planet right now, because he does have this going. But so I don't know, but I agree. The outcome would have to be something in current circumstances and off ramp for Putin, and I don't see how that would happen. But
So just I want to add something
one
to
thing
your
I just
point
want to
about
jump
we don't know
in.
what's going to unfold.
Clinton,
So this morning, in the
hang
last
on,
couple of hours,
Clinton, hang on a second.
yeah.
Hold on. We have
Messi's been trying to get in for a while.
there's a lady in Clubhouse, and then I owe it to Robert, who got cut off and is still yet to make his point. So we're going to go to whoever the lady was. I think it was Messi, and then Robert, and then to Clinton. Go ahead, Messi.
No, I was just going to push back what Heman was saying. This is not a competition, but I am a product of a civil war refugee. I went through quite a few of them. And I'm also from a country that has been going through so many wars. So when we are talking about settlement, especially like from a perspective of what you said from Arab Spring and others, and these are some of the things are being actually started even within because of the population being dissatisfied. And when there is this type of negotiated settlement, the sad part of it is we settle with another problem that pops up in 10 years or something like that. So Ethiopia wants bloody military regime, which I don't even bother to tell you what my family got devastated. I lost parents, I lost family members. That's what we went through. And guess what? With the settled agreement and political settlement and diplomacy, it was settled with not the people being on the table. And then we created a new one, which was actually impetus to the current civil war that we just went through. So it is very, very important sometimes to consider also the people within that, what they are aspiring for, what they are fighting for, what they are looking for, instead of always the Western or the Eastern or whatever it might be from outside. We are trying to settle or what we think are the best way to solve a problem with even creating another problem. That's what you mentioned, Hammond, for example, the Arab Spring. Yes, the people were trying to get into a better solution, but because of some influence, whether it's Al-Sisi replacing Hosni Mubarak, which was a similar thing, or Sudan, which is continuing to fight again, because the civil, they wanted to have a better life like anybody else. They want to have a better thing. But there was a settled kind of diplomatic solution, which they were dissatisfied, and the military trying to take over. And now it's not even a solution. So they are really going through it. So sometimes it is really, really important to consider not only that the history that you went back, but at least the reality why we're fighting right now. And also, even when we think it's the best way, peaceful solution, diplomatic solution, we should think about the future problems that it can pop it brings up. That's all I was gonna say. Thank
Robert,
you.
your turn. Thank you, Messi. Robert.
Okay. First of all, I really appreciate the back and forth here, and that is why this discussion is very special. Heyman, appreciate your comments, and also Clinton, appreciate yours. Real quick, earlier we had someone say that there has not been a popular coup since France, and again, that goes back to the mentality that the rest of the world is seeing, that everybody thinks that everything is, not everybody. A lot of people think that everything is Europe. Be very careful as we become more global and connected on how that thought process impacts the rest of the world as they become stronger. Because be very careful of just thinking everything originated in Europe, and the only time popular revolt occurred was in Europe. Just no history. That's where history does matter. To what Clinton said, you're right, Clinton. It is democracy versus totalitarian, but I think it's more democracy versus what people may call rogue leadership, and everyone is watching that. Lastly, though a lot of people are celebrating the pressures and everything being shut down in Russia, keep in mind the door swings both ways. There may have been people on the fence in Russia that were against the war, but as you reduce their income and wealth and everything like that, you can push them into a corner. And so we need to be, I think it would have been different if the world had put, I like what the world has done, but if they had put more pressure swiftly on the oligarchs, I don't think the Russian people would have cared, and probably would have been more supportive of what was going on versus the broader brush things that are going on. And you can look at the sanctions. We haven't even put the sanctions on every last oligarch yet. And then lastly, I appreciate the conversation. Keep it going. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Clinton, I'm going to hand it to you next. I just want to add a couple of thoughts. I love what you said, Robert, which is, and something Nicholas brought up but didn't totally tie the knot on, that I think is critical to point out, which is this is not an ordinary war. This is one person versus a, a people who have decided they want democracy. They already had their own sort of internal civil war when Putin already tried to put in a Putin puppet to run the country, and they fought against it. And they had this was not that long ago. What was it? 5 years ago, where Kiev nearly burned to the fucking ground over this, and they came out on top already. They've already fought this, and they've already, in their minds, won it. A few years, not that long ago, very recent history, relatively, and so in their minds, they. Time and history is on their side in their mind. The future is on their side in their mind. And if they do manage to withstand this brutal punishment, and Russia is going to withstand a different type of brutal punishment in the very near term, and it's a question of who's going to blink first. And if the Ukrainians manage to withstand it, there's an interesting thought that has not been introduced. I've not heard anyone introduce this thought, which is that Ukraine is not a tourist destination, nor is it part of the EU. I predict both of those could change in the very near future, whereby if Ukraine joins the EU, which, by the way, the EU has already said we're going to fast track the shit out of that. And if that happens, I predict Ukraine will become the hottest tourist destination for Europeans for the next decade to come. And I predict Ukraine is now deeply embedded in the minds of the world in a way that it never was before, in a truly miraculously inspirational way. That, by the way, for the non-Americans in the room, there's a secret button in Americans, which is we love to see the little guy stand up to the bully and punch the bully back in the nose, the underdog. And what's happening right now with Ukraine speaks so directly to the heart of the American spirit of fighting back against a big bully that, we can't not go all in emotionally on this issue as we watch this as a proxy war, which it is. And I have 5 other thoughts I want to get into, but I'm going to pause because I'm already speaking too much. And Clinton, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, I agree with everything that Tyler just said. And again, I sound like a broken record. At the end of the day, I firmly believe, and maybe that's bad of me as someone who writes columns and things like this, but I firmly believe that we have a responsibility as a civilization on this planet to support democracies and functioning democracies, because that's exactly what Ukraine has become over the last 10 years. And that's what makes it uniquely different from some of the other geographical areas that were touched on. And if we turn our backs on democracy in Ukraine, are we also going to turn our backs on democracy in Taiwan? So I go to my earlier point that this really is about democracy versus authoritarianism. And lastly, I just want to say, when we don't know what's going to happen. So just as a quick FYI, this morning, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had its power cut. Now, the reason that's important is because, and to tie this into tech news around the world, is that there are approximately 20,000 spent nuclear rods that are sitting in pools constantly being cooled. And the Ukrainians have stated in the last 2 hours that they have 48 hours of backup diesel generator capability in order to keep 20,000 nuclear rods cooled in Chernobyl. And
Actually,
they
the
have
IEA
gone
has issued
to
a.
Moscow, and they have requested for Moscow to put a ceasefire in and around the Chernobyl site so that they can at least arrange to get the power back on, because this has the potential, I'm not saying a guarantee, but the potential to be a disaster for the planet at large.
I have the article.
So
I'm going to pin the article to the top of the room. You're right. It's breaking news out of the last 2 hours. Reuters article's 2 hours old. It says Ukraine warns of risk of radiation leak at Chernobyl. And it says the Ukraine appealed to Russia for temporary ceasefire on Wednesday to allow repairs to be made to a power line to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, warning that there could be radiation leak if the electricity outage continues. To your point, that they have to keep the spent rods cooled.
Actually,
yeah,
the IEA has made a statement on
Tyler,
that.
and furthermore, that this, I think this speaks deeply to Vladimir Putin's state of mind, because when this is
Okay,
something that is this serious and that important, and Vladimir Putin is refusing to tell his troops to stop what they're doing, specifically around the nuclear power plant. And by the way, this is the third such event that has occurred at nuclear power plants in the last 7 days. That tells us a lot about Vladimir Putin's instability when it comes to his state of mind. Thank you.
And this will
I think it's
affect
worth noting.
Belarus
I
and
just think it's worth noting the.
Russia
Hold on, Frank.
as well.
Okay, Frank, hold on a second.
Just
Hold on.
just one
Wait,
comment.
Nicholas, hold on. I want to go to Frank, who rarely speaks, but does a ton of brilliant DMing, by the way. But Frank, your mic was incredibly loud. Please repeat your point.
It wasn't my mic, but I just wanted to add that this will affect Russia and Belarus next to Ukraine. So just wanted to add that.
Okay,
Yeah,
Nicholas.
and I agree with you. So this tells
I just
us
wanted to
that
add.
Vladimir
I just
Putin's
want.
state of mind should be questioned.
Clinton, I want
Okay.
to go to Nicholas, but Nick, and then I'll go to Valerie. Val, could you please mute your mic for now? I think Valerie, if you can mute your mic, thanks. The point is well made, which is how Putin is seemingly playing carefree with these nuclear plants is very concerning, and it's both Chernobyl and the other major plant, which I have struggled to pronounce correctly. And that's it's possible. I'm projecting here, obviously, that he's doing this to paint a persona that he's willing to shoot from the hip with things nuclear. But that he's actually, I pray that he's actually sane enough to be in control of them. But this does enable him to paint himself as fast and loose with nuclear, if you get my drift. And I hope it's just a bluff. So,
And
but go ahead.
Tyler, one thing though, you have to bring in the IAEA's statements
Mhm.
because you cannot have like this kind of discussion without bringing in the authorities who actually are
Yeah,
monitoring this,
yeah, yeah,
and they are the ones who are reporting on all this. And their scientists have actually said that yes, this is dangerous and this is against the policy, and they need to recover the power. But these spent rods are more than 20 years old, and they've lot much heat, and they have
yeah.
backup generators. And so I'm not saying this or not. But again, this is again, we need to have cooler minds look at all the evidence and the pictures.
Right.
And I want Ukrainian people to not die. That's all I want right now.
We
Good
And the
point.
key thing is there's going to be a lot of people dying because of the fact that there's going to be this escalation of rhetoric. And that's what we need to be careful of, because if you look at the evidence, follow the experts, look at the radiant energy, look at IAEA data first before we comment on any further about this nuclear spillover and
Yeah, hold
everything
on a
else.
minute. There is no escalating rhetoric in this space. I clearly stated that there's
Yeah,
backup diesel generator
right.
according to the IEA, and that according to them, it's good for 48 hours. So there was no
Can I make a meta
escalating
point?
rhetoric from this space.
No, but they actually
Can I?
state that it can be air cooled. These can be air cooled. They don't need
Yeah,
energy,
the
not
tweet
water
is
Can I
cooled.
just?
No,
3.4
they
hours
didn't
old.
actually say that. They said they
Can I?
think it may be able to do that, but they don't know yet. They need to actually get in to examine it properly.
Right.
Nick,
Can
Tyler,
sorry,
we
Can I
appoint
make
another
one
Iraq
observation?
I
That it
want to go to
changes the
Nicholas.
structure.
Everybody, Nicholas, please go.
Can I just make one quick observation that's going to change your calculus? Because I saw this 24 hours ago, and the point that I'm going to make, which could be contentious, is that you don't know. So people were talking before about false flags. I remind everyone of the sinking of the Lusitania. There are two groups that have an interest in effectively creating an issue at Chernobyl or the other nuclear power station, because it draws parties in, because it is an escalation. So I already saw misinformation and disinformation being sown that is preparing for the fact that the question will be asked, is this a provocation that is being done to prompt another action? So don't think of it only as Putin. Think of it as, if you were in an existential fight for your life,
Yeah.
would you show the Europeans what's in it for you? Question mark. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, we need to go back to
Tyler, can I speak
not
about St.
no
George,
no
Utah?
David no David no
Yeah. So
Valerie
I'm going to along the same line, thank you, Tyler.
Valerie
With whatever the
Valerie,
Russian,
hold
yeah,
on, I gotta mute you.
whatever the Russian.
Valerie, I have to mute you. Valerie, I'm muting your mic because you sound like you're 100 meters away from your microphone. So give it a try.
I forgot I had a Bluetooth
There you
speaker on.
go.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
So with we're talking about the Russian Federation here. Who says they have to even use a typical nuclear weapon? They can weaponize with the power plants. And so, talking about some things earlier, this could be a negotiation point from Putin's perspective. Whether they would follow through on any of these
Bingo.
things, who knows? And I think it's very valid to bring up that yes, course, Ukrainians can use this to their point to draw people in. So it is very tough to navigate, but there could be, but you never know who's going to actually follow through with their threat.
Great point, David. 60 seconds. Go.
Yeah, just simply, I want to make sure everybody understands that I thought that the fallout from Chernobyl went west. I may be incorrect, but in any case, it happened at the Nevada test site when they were still doing above ground bombs, and the number of cancers discovered in southern Utah when one of the plumes went there was huge. So if everybody's bringing up a lot of good points about making sure we get a sense for is this intent from Putin, or as Nicholas's point, But this could easily, just like as we're learning about what in cyber war could trigger a military war. This is absolutely something that possibly could trigger NATO's engagement if it's conceived that it was something Putin did on purpose.
Okay. Carl sent me a brilliant DM was arguing that forget my suggestion about tourism in Ukraine, that Ukraine stands to have an absolutely booming tech industry if they manage to survive all of this. And he says already has a big tech presence, which indeed it does, in the form of remote developers, which is absolutely true. But the wider acceptance of global remote work plus a global affinity for the country, it could set the stage for it to explode. I completely agree. It's a great point. And there's a whole bunch of other auxiliary articles around all of this that people have been DMing. And Valerie sent in one about hackers. No, that's a China one. Let me hold that one. Here it is. BB sent in this one that China is going to provide 5 million yuan worth of humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. That's a really interesting move at this point in the chess match.
Yeah,
China, yes,
they go through the Red Cross, but it was announced by the spokesman Zhao Lijian. It's the National Defense Department of what? Sorry, I forgot. I think it's the Defense Department.
doesn't matter. The 5 million, the 5 million yuan, for those who don't know how to do the calculation, is about 800,000 US dollars. What would be really interesting is to see what would make that even more 2022 is if they were to do it in their own new crypto currency, the central bank digital currency. That would be the ultimate headline for March of 2022. The other interesting one going around,
I would retire at that point.
wouldn't that just be the ultimate? It would make March 2022 the best Netflix series of all time at this point. Ted Abramson, our friend in the audience, sends in this one from The Guardian that this is.
I think they call it apocalypse bingo.
This is the fossil fuel war, is the headline from The Guardian. Ukraine's top climate scientist speaks out as Western governments untangle themselves from Russian oil and gas. Svetlana Krakovska notes that the roots of the climate crisis and invasion are related to fossil fuels. And indeed, one of the huge issues on planet Earth at the moment, especially in the West, is that the EU and the US are both simultaneously drawing up plans to cut themselves very firmly off of Russian oil, which is a huge undertaking, as you might imagine. But Biden's announcing that, and that in itself is a sort of escalation, and that has got obviously Putin's attention. And it was a question of would the U.S. have the actual appetite, and will the EU actually have the appetite to go through that? And of course, he had to preemptively calculate that, and it's almost certain that he assumed and calculated that they wouldn't do that, because it puts the ball back in his court. Of course, he'll likely sell it to China at a discount. But the next other related headline is that the U.S. rejects Poland's jet offer for the Ukraine. The United States has rejected Poland's surprise announcement that it would hand over its fleet of MiG-29 fighter jets to President Zelensky's government. And the headline from the Times is that the U.S. rejects Poland's jet offer for Ukraine. The Pentagon spokesperson, John Kirby, said that this raised the concerning prospects of warplanes departing from a NATO base to fly into airspace that is contested with Russia over Ukraine. So, to be continued on that one, because I think the logical solution is to move them to Moldova to take off from there, so that you're not taking off from a NATO space.
Right. Originally, this should be a win-win-win deal for both America, Poland, and Ukraine. But it seems that Poland doesn't want to be the direct country to be responsible to send.
Well, Sweden. Yeah. By the way, for those who don't know, Poland and Sweden are separated. You can throw a rock from fucking Poland to Sweden, by the way, and Sweden is not part of NATO, so that could be an interesting move that I don't think Sweden would want to do. But Clinton's got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with whoever the previous woman was that was just speaking.
Baby.
I think. Oh, hi. I think obviously what kind of blew this agreement up, pardon the pun, in the last 18 hours was that Poland didn't want to take responsibility for what was a bilateral agreement for all intents and purposes between Poland and Ukraine. And they wanted, and I'm not an American, by the way, and they wanted the United States to basically carry this and to give them cover. So I do think that it was a good agreement. And I think in their hurry to try to hang this on the shoulders of the United States, they ended up either mothballing the whole thing, or to Tyler's point, they're going to have to look for some other partner to act as the transition, if you will, from of aircraft from one country to the next.
Okay, another.
I think they're just learning the limits of statecraft when you're a member of NATO. What is being said here, it seems, is that the Americans are saying you can't just give your air force when you're a member of NATO, because essentially you're only able to give that air force because you're going to use NATO's protection. So Putin will see it as a NATO, escalation, and that is not what America wants. So what you're seeing is not only the power that Putin has, but you're seeing the limits of other sovereign nations when they are in alliance pacts. That's what I think is happening here.
One thing, Tyler and BB, since BB came into, one thing you guys will find interesting is the fact that there's this talk about the fact that these F-16s were actually, they're supposed to be delivered to Taiwan instead of Poland. And so that's what was reported by U.S. military reports. But the thing is, that's what's the Ukrainian minister this morning, I think he reported that, I know why the Poland's not giving us the jets. It's because U.S. has promised them to Taiwan. And there's that rhetoric that's going on too, so just be aware.
And just to add, like, those limits are by design,
Yeah.
because
Not the
it
same
makes it
batch.
more
So
attractive for other countries to get in. Like, this is how difficult it is if you're not in NATO for us to help you.
Yeah.
Without,
I
yeah.
it's more like a conflict inside the U.S. because it was Blinken to come up with this idea, and but at the same time, the Defense Department doesn't like this idea.
Okay, so
But apparently there's a whole stock of F-16s not being used in the U.S. because they've been parked, and there's a ton of F-16s that are can be sent off, but it's just political games right now.
Poland has already got a fleet of the F-16, so actually
Yeah.
they have pilots for that, so they can replace their old Russian fighters with this new American F-16. So actually,
Yeah.
that's why it's a win scenario for them.
They're playing hot potato with the Jets.
Yep.
well,
If I may add something, sending jets is only probably a quarter of the story, because you still have to provide logistics for them and pilots, and those don't grow on trees. They'll take a very long time to have pilots who are capable of using F-16s efficiently in their native nations. So it's just a
Yeah,
sign.
but for
It's just a signal.
Ukrainian, they can fly those MiGs.
There was
okay,
another thing about Russian jets using GPS, American GPS satellites to navigate. So I'm wondering how
No,
GPS
actually,
and
Heyman, that's
is that
incorrect.
wrong?
They have their own system called GLONASS. So
Right, but
that's
the
wrong.
thing is they've actually found a couple of Russian jets using GPS as well along thing. I'll look up. I'll get you the reference to that. But it's
You can
interesting.
actually buy GPS receivers which
Right.
contain GPS, GLONASS, and the
Yes.
Chinese in one chip.
Yeah.
GPS is that category.
And European.
okay. So the breaking news is that, according to Wall Street Journal, and there's video evidence inside and out, that a Russian airstrike hit a maternity hospital in Ukraine, in the city of Mariupol, and buried people, including children. Ukrainian authorities said as President Vladimir Putin's forces pressed their offensive across Ukraine in the northern besieged city of Sumy, officials said they managed to move about 5,000 residents overnight, although officials reported more shelling in the past 24 hours. One bomb killed 22 people. I guess the unfortunateness from the Russian perspective is that the bombing of this hospital is now being very well documented. And
Wow.
the Ukrainians, while they They certainly know how to use social media. Let's put it that way, and that this is likely to become the poster child for what this is going to be very hard for Putin to
Tyler,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
You're raising a very
Just,
interesting
just a
subject,
technical
Tyler.
point here.
Okay.
You're glitchy on Twitter Spaces. You're like 80% in and out.
That's fine.
I couldn't understand the last what you said, so I don't know what's going on. But it's a little bit bad today.
It might be you, Clinton. Are you able to hear everything I'm saying in Twitter Space?
You're coming in clearly now, but I agree that earlier it was coming in and out in waves.
Okay, thank you. Who was the person that was?
It was Tan, but
Yeah,
I would like to
Tyler.
speak after
The
Tan,
point I was trying
please.
to make is, if you remember the post-mortem of Trump's election, we read all these papers that Russia had this massive internet army based in St. Petersburg, and they were able to manipulate Facebook, what's that company in Cambridge Analytica, and so on and so on. Where the hell is that army now?
Yeah, Facebook said they've specifically Facebook and Twitter and YouTube.
Google.
They've shut down. Yeah, they're no longer operational in there, and they seem to have been well on top of that issue from the get-go, and they made those statements as well. Now that's really
Yeah, and a bunch of companies
by the way
disconnected them from the backbone of the internet also.
That's right. Now here's where it gets really interesting from my perspective, because that happened surprisingly effectively and efficiently at the very beginning, which is very uncharacteristic. Right. There's a couple of other really interesting, uncharacteristically coincidences worth noting here. And I have a special sound file I play for situations such as this, which is President Joe Biden, who probably can't find how to restart his laptop or smartphone, has been going around for the past 5 months. We read the headlines over the past many months that he was bringing the cybersecurity teams together from Google and Facebook and Amazon and wanting them to work together with all of America's top companies and the infrastructure through the cyber that were happening. Really in very, very focused, securing America cyber attack, as if there might be incredibly important attacks coming our way. Now, I say that because in the past 24 hours, some guy in Moscow named Vladimir Putin has said about to retaliate for the economic sanctions. He's now feeling he's going to be told America, the Kremlin has told America to be on standby for the mother of all retaliation for the economic sanctions. And one must ask then, what Russian brands can we expect to be pulled from American shopping malls? Exactly. I struggle to even name one. So,
vodka.
You're right. By the way, Stolichnaya is actually from Latvia. So you're right. The analysis is on a trade basis. America, in terms of on a trade wise, America imports Russian oil to some degree, notable degree. After that, it would be palladium and plutonium. No, I'm sorry, palladium, and after that we go into stuff that
titanium,
fertilizers, and honest to God, fertilizer is one of the biggest imports from Russia to America. That's how little trade America
and nickel.
Fine. My point is, Putin's not going to be able to leverage that in any meaningful way that could hurt America. So my point is, it's almost a given that he'll be doing intense cyber attacks of some kind, which, by the way, is why I've been ranting like a maniac for the past year to double down on securing your own water, food, and energy, because it's digitized, and it will be attacked in a cyber war. Have I not made that point at least 50 times over the past 12 months? I have. So now you realize you should have been listening to your friend Tyler all along, and it seems that Joe Biden was one step ahead of all of you all, because he's been proactively on this issue 24/7, racing to get America secured from cyber attacks, which now seems rather interesting, because one of the other points that Tyler's been trying to make is that it's possible that Joe Biden knew 5 months ago that we would be receiving massive cyber attacks as a consequence, as a retaliation for what's going on in Ukraine today. So how could Biden have known that Russia was going to be retaliating against things that had not yet happened? Clinton, you have
Maybe
your
he
hand.
didn't know it
Because
was
it's
Russia.
solar
Maybe he
Yeah,
was
wind.
so
just,
one of the things to keep in
We've
mind,
been in
anybody.
Tyler, is
cyber.
that when it comes to cyber attacks, unfortunately in the United States, is that if it occurs in private business, which it's not classified as a national security threat. Now that may change in the coming days. To your point, that is something that Biden has been attempting to shed some light on. Now one can argue at how successful he's been at that, and that's been a huge problem. So, for example, if a power utility is 100% private and it doesn't have any sort of state regulation or any sort of state oversight, it's 100% private, then it doesn't get viewed as a national security threat. And obviously, we would all agree that if a power grid crashes in a particular state, that's obviously a security threat. So, there
No,
needs
wait.
to
We've
be
been in
some
cyber
sort of
war
coming
for
together on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, to sort of put a framework in place to recognize what is and isn't a security threat. So and I agree with you, Tyler. It's been a very important point that you've been driving for some time, and there have been some voices in the United States that have been talking about this as well.
Jennifer.
Wait, I'm gonna flip it to Tom too, but we have been talking about this. We've been in cyber war basically for, years. And again, how would Biden know? Because of SolarWinds and the meat packing. I mean, that's when Biden started putting this stuff more out in press because they don't, I mean, it is very underreported. It's not undervalued. But the other
But
one is, we're very underprepared for this. We
yeah,
have, and the reason that, and Biden and Putin did meet and set up a structure about what is considered critical infrastructure, and if you attack us, we're going to attack you back. It's not just
yeah,
that it's private, and private entities don't report it because it's of reputational risk, blah blah blah, liability, and we can handle it better than the FBI.
okay.
So it's not that simple, and we are in it. And did he know it was coming? Yes, but it was coming regardless of this invasion,
I
and we
disagree.
did know about this invasion.
I disagree
So
because I believe, and I've said it before in this room, that Russia was doing deep penetrations ongoing for a very very long time, and has been saving those for a rainy day because that
yeah,
was
no, Russia and China, they're well within all of our. We're all well within everybody's supply chains, and so it's just pulling that trigger, and it's like a dirty bomb because it won't stay focused. It's not like a something that you fire directly at somebody. It's like a dirty bomb. It'll get out. It's like NotPetya in 2017, which took down Maersk and Merck. I mean, it's um, they're there, and so these have to be governed by diplomacy, which is why Biden and Putin met. And again, they're all ready to go. So yes, we are on high alert. We have been. Biden's been pushing this out. Um, all the directives to his top agencies to push this through. So yeah.
And Tyler, to Jennifer's point too, the largest
Oh,
investors in cybersecurity have always been like the big corporations like JP Morgan, the banks, the financial techsters, the pharmaceuticals. I mean, Jennifer knows more on this than any of us, so thanks.
okay. Other interesting
by
developments.
the way, also, if I may add something quickly here, the slew of zero-day bug fixes that we have seen from everybody on Linux, Windows, anywhere, have actually escalated in the last maybe year or so. So maybe that also helped patch a bunch of things that would have been easy targets to be picked up by the beginning of the war. And maybe because a bunch of also the hacking groups have actually allied with the West on this one and vowed to
Not the Russian
basically
hackers.
take out Russian
Oh
targets,
no. Oh no, no, no. Yeah.
like
Uh,
Anonymous.
yeah,
Can I?
but they've got
Yes,
Anonymous is
please
one
go.
group here. There's other groups here. There's groups in China and there's groups in Russia. I mean, you're hearing, just listen to the news daily about these attacks.
Is anyone able to find a legitimate article confirming a tweet that's breaking about Russia bombing a children's hospital?
I think
Yes,
Wall
I
Street
posted it
Journal. Hold
and
on.
succeeded. ABC,
I'm
I've got
looking
it.
at the Zelensky's Twitter. I think he wrote himself.
I found it.
Okay, I can read the whole thing to you. I actually pin it.
Carol? Stop. I got it. Thank you. 35
Yeah,
minutes
on Twitter
ago.
Space.
Thank you. On Reuters. Reuters 35 minutes ago, children's hospital destroyed by Russian bombing. A children's
No,
hospital. What do
that's
you
not the
mean,
source.
Cheryl?
Look at Zelensky's tweet. He wrote it himself.
I'm just reading an article. I'm not claiming to state which is the source. I'm just reading an
I
article.
think he may be just trying to arouse emotions among people. Look at his full tweet. You understand there's a motivation to write it.
Obviously, Ukraine has a
I
very.
tweeted on top on.
Please,
I pinned it on top of Tech
Cheryl,
News
please learn
Space.
to make your comments between my comments, please. So, the article from Reuters says that children's hospital destroyed by Russian bombing. Now, if I read the article, Cheryl won't need to comment like she just did, because it says a children's hospital in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol has been destroyed by Russian airstrikes, the city council said in an online post Wednesday. So that's where the original source is coming from. Quote, here's the quote from the source. The Russian occupying forces have dropped several bombs on the children's hospital. The destruction is colossal, it said, adding that it did not yet know any casualty figures. The report could not immediately be verified by Reuters. Russia has denied targeting civilians in its assault on Ukraine. So, indeed, Ukraine is very, very good at the social media, very, very good at the narrative crafting. They understand that this is a war of media as much as it is a war of attrition and everything else. And they better be very careful that they don't overstep and overplay that card.
Yes.
Exactly. Hey, Tyler, one other thing that they found, studies found observing the Russians in the Syrian conflict is that their smart bombs are not that very smart. So they've been working on that also to try and fix it.
Then they
Okay.
should get some new smart contracts to help those smart bombs in the virtual world. Yesterday had the best term, virtual contracts. Can't wait to see those.
So, Cheryl, please go ahead and make whatever comments you want to make about the children's hospital bombing.
No, because I've been looking at the Zelensky's and the digital minister's tweet recently. I think they can be quite manipulative. So I think we have to be very careful when we extract information from the media. Sorry, because my Twitter is on, so there's a background. So I can read the whole thing, or you can just read it. I actually pinned it on top of the Twitter Space room.
Okay.
Because this Zelensky, I think he's using this topic to try to garner. Okay, how much longer will the world be an accomplished ignoring terror? Question mark. Close the sky right now. Stop the killings. You have the power, but you seem to be losing humanity. He's blaming us.
The article that you pinned is not a children's hospital. That's the maternity hospital, which is very well documented that was recently bombed.
This is 1 hour ago.
Right. But that's the maternity hospital. I'm trying to figure out if there's a separate children's hospital that has been targeted.
It's the same.
Same,
I think both are, you're both in the same.
Okay. And it is very well documented because we have videos inside and out of it being bombed.
Do you see children there?
Tyler, it does not matter. We have 2 million refugees, and Putin is a reckless war criminal. So what you are doing here is adding up some data points, and when anyone wants to go deep into this, because Pyotr Kurtsin was shortly in the room on the speaker stage, and then he left. Probably many people don't know him. He's running now for more than 10 days a 24/7 room. 24-hour room, sorry. And it's all about SITREP, which means situation report. And there are professional people in it. And from all sides, we even had a Russian yesterday, but he had not really a chance to speak. A special Russian, I have to say. So I just want to inform anyone, and how I hope Tyler accepts it, that there is a room for deep dive into this. You can go anytime there. While I hear a lot of half knowledge, I have to say, and platitudes, it is about tyranny and freedom indeed, and he is a criminal. So full stop. But you cannot say, now let's just go and send our chats. But we have to be careful not to create indeed a third world war. That's real. I'm not kidding. And if you go to my bio, you see all the miscalculations of Putin on the top. And I have even a theory why he is not so insane as he looks. because he's betting on a super crisis happening in the next years ahead. And then he might be a winner because he has no big tech. He has totally failed on digital, totally failed on post-fossil, but he might be a winner if this world is going to chaos in a survival mode about resources, as Tyler has frequently said. Take your shit, get, sorry for my language, and think about being autark and having energy, food, water supplies. And this is real, and this is not creating anxiety. I'm talking about the next years ahead. And so thank you for listening. This was Willie. I'm done.
Hey, Tyler,
Cut
I,
it out.
I, I also echo your sentiments about, you know, about having choke points, which is, food, water, and energy. And with all these commodities, whenever it's appropriate, I have a couple of Peter Zahan short 3 to 4 minute updates if you want to hear them Okay. that talk precisely about that, which I think is part of the game plan, which is also part of why I don't think he's an insane person. I think he's actually strategizing, and he's had all this in play for a long time. And again, the thing about him, he's like a magician. A magician holds the cards in his right hand, and everybody's watching the right hand, which is the illusion. The real tricks are with his left hand, and that's where people don't look.
Right.
Most people, I wanted to say, because I've been trying to make a couple of points, and the room has flew by with some great points as well. But the main thing that I wanted to say was more to Jorge's point that is leaning to this is that if you really look at it, and I love that Zihan was mentioned, and I'm gonna mention Mir Shammer as well as some of his contrarian peers as well, from his positions. But we generally have to first understand that Putin isn't insane, and two, most of what I heard is like propaganda, or the way that we've fed, the West has fed propaganda to people here, and I just get to have the ability to be a third party in this, and just help the people that need help on the ground. But mainly, what we have to understand is more so well, yeah, just save the people on the ground fairly is my main point. Like, we just don't want more people
Yeah.
to die. And other than that, like, just all of, like, maybe moral platitudes. I don't want to call people out like that, but generally, it's definitely a real civil war that two intelligent people are fighting. That's between Zelensky and Putin right now.
Okay, so we might have exhausted the Ukraine part of today's program, unless somebody had just final check to see if anyone else has a strong point on the Ukraine Russia topic.
Real
I just
quick, if
want to.
we
I just
Pretty
want
big
to
loss
have
for
a.
me.
One second. So let's do it this way. Flash your mics if you have a strong point to make, so we can move on to the non-tech part. So we'll go in kind of PTR order. Can everyone see the order there? It looks like Cheryl, and then who was after Cheryl? I'm not quite.
Brandon, Robert,
Oh,
David.
perfect. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say I hope that most people here has a common objective is not to escalate to World War III.
Okay, next.
all I want to say is I appreciate the discussion, and to everybody who says that, well, we're not experts or certain people aren't experts, what makes this space special is we may be experts in certain areas, but we have opinions, and I think the world likes more common people sharing their opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Agreed.
I'd just like to say that if the last 2 years have taught me anything, it's that everything that we're saying and thinking about and projecting could change dramatically tomorrow, because there's nothing predictable anymore.
Great point.
Just
Uh,
wanted to
yeah.
just wanted to reinforce it's very dangerous to think or assume that Putin is insane, number one, and also number two, that he is incapable militarily, um, because of what's going on. Because I think it's very facile to not understand the complexities of the issue, and it could cause people to be blindsided if you underestimate.
Yeah, but that's part of the genius, I think. It's the genius move. I think Trump played that card as well. He wants to be
Exactly.
unpredictable as it is. Carl, I know you've got
And
your hand.
Tyler,
One second. Carl's had his hand up over in Twitter for a long time. Go ahead,
yeah,
Carl, and then we'll go to, I believe that was Heyman. Go ahead, Carl.
yeah.
That's right, thank you. Just quickly, I think nobody actually wants a real escalation. Nobody wants to go to World War III, whether that be nuclear or with traditional arms, because everybody loses. To be said, which I think was the feeling that I can't remember his name, the speaker earlier was saying, is that if we say that any intervention, and a lot of people are saying this, any intervention immediately will lead to World War III. If we intervene, we'll be in World War III and we'll be in a nuclear war. If you say that, if you persist with that line of thought, then you're kind of doing Putin's work for him, because he doesn't really ever have to escalate. He doesn't do the threat of it, because we've convinced ourselves that any kind of intervention on our part immediately 100% will lead to World War III and a nuclear fallout. If you say that, then we've kind of already lost, and you're doing most of Putin's work for him, because it's not guaranteed that it will lead to that. And he, as an individual himself, has shown a lot of self-preservation for things like, how he runs his. He's terribly afraid of assassination and being near people and catching COVID, and that's generally, I would say, maybe not the sign of somebody who wants mutually assured destruction. But just I think the narrative that we're pushing in the West by saying any intervention will definitely lead to nuclear war is doing more harm than good, and because I don't think it's a certainty, and we have to have our discussions in a way where that's not classed as a certainty.
Spot
Can I
on.
also
Spot
Very.
on.
say that just as my own personal? Okay, sorry.
We'll
I
go.
think it's David first
Hang,
and then Heyman.
hang on, Davey. It was Heyman's turn.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think the one thing is, Carl, you're absolutely point, and I think it's the same thing as like the Constitution DAO, right? To bring in some old stories, like when you show the opponent, right, what you have and what you're willing to do and how much you're willing to do, you basically lost, right? Basically, like someone else came in and just basically bid $1 more than what they were willing to pay for the Constitution. The same thing, like the whole point of nuclear armaments. The point was in the past was that you actually prevent war by having these things, right? And to also to Dr. Fran's point, we don't know. Yeah, we actually don't know, because if you look at it, former enemies or former adjutants, I mean, like Venezuela, Iran, right, are now being approached by the U.S. for oil, right? So one time a friend or enemy can all of a sudden become your best friend. So I mean, honestly, the people, I mean, us discussing these things and having global discussions about this and making sure the powers that be are not leading us into certain stupid situations is the key, I think. Because if you look at it, and we just ended up, just prior to Dr. Franz saying it, it's a war between Putin and Zelensky. Yes, but it's also some machination. There's some organizations behind these two who are also leading to it. And so I think the discussion is important, that, and also anything can change, yes, but the people can actually enforce that change as long as we don't follow the sort of the speak that's being told us, like not to follow groupthink. That's what my biggest fear is. Not to all march together, just everyone start questioning things too before we end up going somewhere we'll regret. Thanks.
Tyler,
Yeah.
this is Tan.
Yes.
I've tweeted you, or rather shared with you in a DM, an article that Henry Kissinger wrote in 2014 in the Washington Post,
Mm-hmm.
and he predicted this war will happen because of Putin's ambitions and also the mess in Ukraine. And his advice was that Ukraine should become a neutral country. They should not try to join NATO, and the hardcore, what I would call Cold War warriors in NATO, shouldn't push Ukraine into that. He predicted this war will happen sooner or later. So did a couple of other scientists, political scientists. They're predicting in 2018. There's a Russian, the new Russian who's the advisor, Dugin, who's the advisor, a right-wing advisor to Putin. He predicted that the war was inevitable because of certain things that were happening on the ground. And I think it's that ignorance, sweeping things under the carpet because they're far away, doesn't affect us, eventually comes to bite us, because we allow our elected officials to carry out policies without revealing their true intent. And as a result, ordinary people like these kids you mentioned are suffering now because of both sides not willing to agree on a solution that would work for both sides. That's how you get war.
Can I follow on that?
As long as we're going in order, yeah.
Hey Tan, I'll say the following: the USSR fell decades and decades ago. A political scientist trying to tell somebody in another country whether they can try to become a sovereign nation because there's a bully next door, I think that's part of the challenge, right, or the
That's
issue.
what America
So
said, though.
hang on. So my point is the glow of unity. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. The reason why I kind of second the reason why I kind of don't want to call this World War III because there's no Warsaw Pact. There's no, we don't have an Iron Curtain like we did before. We don't. Russia's army is showing us how this fear that we've had for decades is well. I mean, I don't need to even add anything to that, right? So then it becomes this threat of mad, this threat of mad, right? And if you take that out of the calculus, let's just say unity, unity, unity. Hopefully, there'll be minimal lives lost. But this is not. This is Putin's war. This is Putin's aggression. This is a KGB agent who hijacked Russia. And so that's what we're dealing with. We're not. This is not about Ukraine doing this and that. This is all about Putin.
Okay, got
So
it.
he's the one who's going to be pulling the triggers and driving the escalation. But let's stay positive about it in the sense that as a world we can come together and deal with this bully.
Is it my turn, Tyler? I'm trying to figure that out because I'm in club deck. Is it I'm the very last one. okay? Let's just hang tight and try and do PTR.
What was Damaler? You want to say something?
Yes, yeah. I wanted to say something. My points have been kind of stepped over during this whole chat, but that's fine.
Keep
The
it
main thing that I wanted to
keep it tight
say,
as you can.
just
Yeah,
sorry, excuse me.
keep it as tight as you can. We got to make sure
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. The main thing that I wanted to say is that just looking from the younger perspective, but also historically, astute perspective as well. It's not necessarily political scientists that are saying these things. It's them watching the way that these leaders in nations, because it's not just one side, Putin saying this is what someone's allowed to do, or political scientists saying this is what Ukraine should do. This is really a cajoling of sides, and Ukraine is really just playing in the middle. And the main reason I said that, it's between Zelensky and Putin now is that, both people have had batteries in their back and both of them are raring to go. But however, if we look at the long game of this and the long tail, and I'll keep this one exceptionally short, is that going back to what Heyman said at the beginning, which was, and what I echoed yesterday was, the world is watching. So every single move, every single play is being recorded in the history books, not just in the mind of the West, but in the minds of people around the globe. So so to speak, is that there's one thing that's being said in America, and there's one way people are getting news, but the way that I get American news and the way everybody people in America get their news is totally different. So I would just say that it's this when people say it's a war between democracy and totalitarianism, I'm just gonna put the adage there. Not everyone thinks that.
Okay.
Who's up? I guess I'm next. Go ahead. Okay, so there's a lot of collective intelligence in this room, and I really admire that. But despite the intelligence, we're all humans, and there's a danger, and I've heard a lot of conflating apples versus oranges. Yeah, they're both fruit, but the law of identity is based on the fact that they have distinct properties. So I like to separate some of the apples and oranges. I think there's one topic is whether we agree with what he's doing or we don't, versus trying to understand what he's thinking and what he's been saying for 2 decades. Based on those things, it shouldn't be surprised that he's doing any of this. He's been saying it, and for a madman, I think he's kind of shown a lot of constraint over 20 years for things that he said he would do if we continue to cross his red line. Again, that doesn't mean I agree with him. Number two, it's one thing to talk about to use tactics, and it's another thing to just talk about reality, which is scary.
Number three, there's a big difference between World War III and a nuclear war. Okay, nuclear war, they do have that escalation theory. I just want to repeat it very quickly. It's a process by which nuclear war happens, and it's called escalation. So two nuclear powers start out with a grievance of some kind. The grievance may be played out using proxy powers, etc. But one side escalates the conflict by doing something unexpected or extreme. The other side does not stand still. They take an extremely retaliatory action. The first actor then retaliates to the retaliation and so on. Now we have a dynamic where two sides are climbing the escalation ladder. Again, it's important to emphasize that neither side really wants a nuclear war. But once they start climbing the ladder, it's hard to stop. Eventually, one side pushes the other so far that the only response is to use nuclear weapons. At that point, you're no longer just escalating, you're at the brink of a nuclear launch. To make matters worse, the other side, sensing that their opponent may go nuclear, will be under pressure to go nuclear first in order to avoid being hit themselves. This then goes into another branch of theory involving first strike, second strike, counter first, and counter value strategies. So the point is, a nuclear war doesn't start with the pushing of the button. It starts way before that and has a lot of escalating steps. So there's a big difference between World War III, which possibly could happen, but I don't think we're going to go into a nuclear war. Remember to separate apples and oranges.
Okay,
Thank you, George. Thank you, George.
perfect.
And
Willie, hold on a second. I have the perfect follow up, and then I'll hand it to you, which is this article that just came out from Sky News. Take that for what it's worth. And it says, breaking Ukraine war. The West has serious concern Putin could unleash chemical weapons on Kiev. As a perfect follow-up to what Jorge was just saying, which is, this is in action precisely what he just described. So Western officials have warned of their serious concern that Vladimir Putin could order chemical weapons to be used on Ukraine's capital. So it's that right there is something to be very. I want people to raise their awareness about the dynamic of humans and media and politicians, and that's a very potent cocktail that can be manipulated. And this article could be a really nice exemplification of that point.
And you're right. And Tyler, I think there's a background to it. It's from that Senate hearing, I believe, from the U.S. Department Senate hearing with Victoria Nuland, Nuland. She's the Undersecretary of State for the U.S., and she actually stumbled and said that there are some biological labs in Ukraine that we're worried about that all of a sudden came out and in the conversation. And she said, if anything happens, it's 100% Russia that did it. Right. And that statement is what has triggered a lot of people on both sides discussing what the hell's going on, what's the plan. And apparently she has a history with Ukraine. She was involved in the 2014 elections in Ukraine. She's a U.S. undersecretary. Thanks.
Okay.
Yes, my final statement here is Willie speaking, really my final statement. It's a multi-layered thing, and I only said it's a deep dive room there for this if someone is interested. Of course, I appreciate all the contributions. Also, opinions are welcome, but sometimes it's dangerous what I've heard from Clinton. Yeah? It's not about that something leads to World War III and then we should avoid it. This is no strategist thinking like this. But if it's 0.1% when it leads to mutual destruction, to avoid this, and this is a difference. Nobody says that step A leads to World War III, then it would be just super, super, super stupid to go to this first step. But it's about having this 0.1% that it leads to that. Because if we have a war theater in Europe with exchange of nuclear, I can tell you, you in US might be very happy still, but we might be just dead and very much suffering in the millions. And we have 2 million refugees already. There's no doubt that this man is very cruel. Yeah. And he has proven this in the Chechen war, where he was on the world stage very cruel. And this made him the success in his own elections. Just get this as a premise. And he lately said, I'm finishing, he lately said in his speech when the war was going on, that the communists made the mistake to let Ukraine be as a state. And since this is analogous to what Tehran does to Israel when Tehran says Israel is not acknowledged as a state. And this is eliminativism. This means his ideal would be that Ukraine is gone, but not, of course, with not profiting from having occupied Ukraine in a way like he did with other countries already. The one position is that it's a new Belarus, like a vassal state, or it's like a Chechen war, just killing a lot of people, and he doesn't care because he is on a mission on revenge since he experienced it as a young man, as a KGB officer here in Germany, in Dresden, the downfall of the wall. And then he experienced, because he was responsible, it's all real, you can read it everywhere, uh, that he was totally helpless. And from this on, I think he felt humiliated, not only he as a person, but his whole political class, the whole elite of communists. And most of communists were oligarchs later. And others are on the tour of revenge, and he's part of it. He's on a mission like this. And this makes him not insane, but very angry. This is the difference. This was Billy speaking. I'm done.
Thank you, Billy.
Hey, can we go to when are we going to start some of the the tech side of this? Great.
Right.
And then let's keep in mind, everybody isn't always for peace. There is money made off of war and chaos.
Great point. On a final point, Frank just DM'd me a rather good argument for why Putin ostensibly might use chemical weapons. Frank, would you mind sharing what you DM'd me?
The audio on Twitter Spaces is very bad, so I'll stand from that.
Okay. Do you mind if I share it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So he made the point that Putin has previously used chemical weapons. As people in England will know, he used Novichok on that Russian former spy there in the middle of England. And then had somebody killed in Berlin in the Tiergarten, and then with Navalny with some type of biological weapon, ostensibly the poisonings that he does with people, his own people. In the case of Navalny, is a form of chemical weapons. It's actually a fairly good point that he's actually become rather accustomed to and even a bit immune to doing this. So it's actually a very good point. So now, with that said, we have the traditional big tech stories that we always run through, and as usual, those sometimes touch on Ukraine as well, like this one, which happens to be the biggest story of the day. And as custom requires, we have the air horn. Here we go. March 10th, it's top stories from Wall Street Journal that Biden signs an executive order directing federal agencies to study the risks posed by digital assets, such as evading sanctions, and also to consider a digital dollar. So ties the knots perfectly, does it not? Because, as I said, this was not a big surprise to people paying attention, that we're going to see the U.S. potentially crack down on cryptos of all kinds because they will be employed by Russia to circumvent sanctions. And, that's too bad that you were so interested in them. We're going to have to ban them. That's unfortunate for you. And, well, simultaneously, we need our own digital. While you're at it, let's consider our own digital dollar. That is interesting for entirely different reasons, by the way. Similar, but very different reasons. So the next big story is, although no doubt somebody's going to want to have a comment on that. Maybe Nicholas, you want to comment on Biden's executive order about the risks of digital assets and the digital dollar. If Nicholas is still with us, I should say, and he might have jumped out. He did. But there was a companionish, somewhat related story. May, you sent me a DM about, was it Dubai? Somebody else had a...
Yeah, Dubai has made the first regulation thanks to Faraz. He found it. Our good old Faraz found some documentation in a news article today that they're starting to assess regulation on virtual assets, which in essence includes NFTs.
There you go. And Fred Wilson, who's one of the best early stage tech investors that ever was, took to Twitter to say that the president's executive order on Web3 is a landmark moment. Finally, we have a federal government focused on Web3 and organizing itself to engage constructively with the sector. This is long overdue. So he's taking an obviously optimistic tone with it. Yep.
Tyler?
Yes?
I did also tweet it, I think you and Ben, I'm not sure, regarding the fact that, no, it was Carl and Kieran. Carl had tweeted out something and I just gave a little simple thought out loud, sort of ideating that they're basically not going to do any regulatory stuff, probably won't do anything till like mid-2023 in my opinion, right? However, one of the things that's interesting that I had mentioned a while ago as well, when this order was being designed or being sort of looked into before, is that he's asking his staff to go take about 500 days plus of educating themselves on the space, which is very interesting, and to come back and sort of report. So I'd be very curious to see what's going to happen because they still have to learn about the space first.
Okay, so Anil Dash, who played a significant role as in the early days of crypto, says, if I remember correctly, I might be twisting my names, but Anil says this was always the strategy: race to quickly have multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies in the crypto sector, so that no strong regulation could be passed because it would be anti-business, without regard to impact on regular people. It's I think, a great point, which is the Andreessen Horowitzes were boosting a lot of the crypto space because now they're big players. And Coinbase, if you tried to shut that down, you would be perceived as a politician as being, anti-competitive, anti-business, etc. And they're not the only player for sure. It's an interesting point. So the next big article is all about Apple's M1 Ultra chip that we watched the live stream of yesterday. For those who missed it, it's two M1 Max dies combined into a single chip, 800 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth, 64 GPU cores to outperform pretty much everything else. It's quite impressive, I have to say. You can watch the Apple live stream replay. The next article is from the Washington Post. As Western tech companies react to sanctions, Russian streamers on Twitch, gig workers on Upwork, and creators on OnlyFans have all lost their livelihoods. So, meaning, as the Western tech companies are falling in line with the sanctions, they're complying with the sanctions, or they're stopping business in Russia, pretty much all at this point, seemingly most of tech is now complying and no longer doing business in Russia, like Airbnb, for example. And that means a whole lot of people who had been doing business on American tech platforms like Russian hosts inside of Airbnb or Booking.com or, Twitch or YouTube or OnlyFans or on and on and on and on and on. That's now that the gig economy is a robust thing. Uber drivers, for example, that's a whole lot of unemployed people. That's a whole decent chunk of the economy now kind of having been wiped clean. And then the story goes on to use the poster child effect of Arina, a 22-year-old illustrator in Russia, first started using a freelance platform called Upwork last year, and it changed her life. And now she was building her business on a platform which no longer exists. So that's what that article's about. Aram,
That's
you're
incredibly
jumping?
important to normal Ukrainians that are being affected, but I'm not Ukrainian, sorry, Russians that are being affected by all of these sanctions and, couldn't cause an uproar on the streets, right? Which is, one of the games that the West or NATO may want.
Right. So
It's
the
Tyler.
next,
I have a tweet to share.
Tyler,
yes. Hold on.
Asif here. Just quickly,
Asif, hold
did you
on.
guys
Hold
just?
on, Asif.
Okay, sorry.
Aram was trying to jump in, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you. It's a tweet from SpaceX this morning. I watched the launch for the Falcon 9 around 7 a.m. And then I was waiting for the confirmation for the 48 satellite Starlink that were deployed later in the low Earth orbit successfully. And the amazing response by the flight director responding to the Russian space agency's tweet earlier, a couple of days ago. Response is, it's time to let the American broomsticks fly and sounds of freedom to be enjoyed because, like the Russian space agencies retracted their cooperation, they're refusing to allow us to use their rockets. And due to SpaceX, that tweet is, just responding to his kind of humorous comment. So just wanted to share that this morning. It was fun to watch the Falcon 9 launch.
Those broomsticks are quite advanced. Those SpaceX broomsticks.
Somebody's trying to talk, and it was barely legible. Eric IO, you sound like you're on volume 1 out of 100.
Tyler, shall I talk?
Asif was next, and then we'll go to Eric if you get your mics
I've been in meetings, so I might miss it. But did you guys discuss biological laboratories that's been raised about Ukraine that Russia's trying to take over?
We just barely touched it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because there is news. I guess first casualty of war is true. So there's news in Russia that Ukrainians are going to release biological nerve agents or gases and stuff. But I don't know if there's been. But I think the Senate asked the U.S. Senior scientists, and they said that that's definitely not going to be the case. But Russia is trying to take over the Ukrainian biological laboratories. And I wondered if anyone's found anything on it, and have you discussed it?
No, we've just barely grazed on it. It seems like it's a little too early in the development of that news thread of the the whole ordeal to even make educated comments.
Yeah, possibly propaganda.
Right, and it's just a little
Tyler,
too early to tell. Yeah.
where is the location of these labs? Because there was a discussion about the placement of Russian army and why they are stopping at certain points, not entering certain area, but kind of moving towards other directions. So I'm wondering where these plants are located.
You go ahead and do your own research. I don't think anyone here will have an answer for you right
Okay,
away.
thank you.
Okay. So the next,
Tyler,
yes,
it's Netta. Sorry, can I just say something?
hold for 2 seconds. Let's see if Eric got his mic working.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just saying that the
You're on volume 3 now out of 100, Eric.
Okay, I give up. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for playing.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Poor Eric.
Yeah. Netta, was that you? Go ahead.
Yeah, that was me. I just got off the phone with a friend of mine. I was part of a peace mission years ago, and he's a Ukrainian soldier, actually now in the U.S. Is a U.S. soldier. And he just literally called me right now a couple of minutes ago, and he's got family members in Mariupol that he's trying to go in and trying to get out of, trying to get the paperwork okay to get himself released so that he can go back there for search and rescue to get his family members out. Was there somebody here 2 days ago that was dealing with situations like this that I can get on the phone with and put these people together?
I don't recall.
It wasn't Piotr, was it?
Might have been. Might have been in his room because I don't recall that.
Who are you trying to get connected with?
I thought there was somebody that was helping. He's a
Nada,
U.S.
if you want, yeah, I could link you up with some people, Ukrainian people who are dealing on Telegram. So you could DM me, and also I'm not sure anyone else. I wasn't here 2 days ago, so I don't know.
Okay,
Nada, I
so
would
I
probably
have links to many of the agencies and
Just DM her.
organizations who are working in Ukraine. So connect
just
with me.
DM.
That's great. Just DM her. Anyone who has links, just DM them to her.
Thank you. It's Hyman and who else? I'm sorry.
Doesn't matter.
Iran,
I'll
that was
DM you.
Iran.
Iram,
Aram. Okay.
Iram.
So the next story is from the Washington Post that a company called Lumen, a second major American internet carrier, is pulling out of Russia. The move is certain to increase Russia's isolation from outside information. A leading American internet provider to Russia announced Tuesday that it was severing business relations in Russia, a move likely to increase Russia's isolation as its citizens slip behind what some analysts are calling the new digital Iron Curtain. Lumen became the second top US-based carrier to make such a move in recent days following Friday's announcement by Cogent Communications. Taken together, these moves are likely to make it harder for Russians to gain access to international services such as news sites and social media based in the West. And that might help you explain the lack of Russian bots everyone's commenting on lately. Telecommunications experts have said access to internal networks within Russia would not be affected. American technology and telecommunications companies have been cutting services in Russia since it invaded Ukraine last month. And now the remaining, according to this article, the remaining data sources for international for Russia are based in Sweden, Italy, and the United Kingdom. So time will tell if they will cut ties. A related story from the New York Times says that Amazon stops letting customers in Russia and Belarus open AWS accounts, which is their cloud-hosted service. AWS says its biggest customers in Russia are multinational firms with local developer teams. And indeed, why is this important? Because it turns out that the internet is disproportionately, and technology is disproportionately American-based companies. There's this company called Google. You might have heard of another one called Apple, maybe even Microsoft. Do these ring a bell? They might. You might have even used some of these products yourself. And Russians have too. And that's why that's so interesting, because America, the government, controls ultimately those companies and can demand, in fact, that they stop doing business with Russia on a moment's notice. So it will be interesting to see in the very near future, because Mr. Vladimir Putin has said in the past 25 hours that the U.S. It should be on standby to receive the reciprocal negative consequences of their strong sanctions, economic sanctions against Russia, that they're going to retaliate. And the question is, what will that retaliation be? What kind of obscure vodka will they stop selling in America, for example? God only knows. We shudder in anticipation. But it is very likely that what Mr. Putin has in mind is a cyber attack of some kind that they've been saving up for a rainy day, because God knows they've done endless penetration to explore vulnerabilities in the U.S. infrastructure. So if they do release that, my senses tell me that the U.S. will then amplify the sanction game, specifically on a technological basis, thereby requiring Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and the likes to immediately cease all data transmissions to and from Russia, which would send them into the fucking dark ages. They would literally go back to 1970 at that point, instantly. So, meaning there would be no devices. There would be no smart devices of any kind. There would be no technology since 1970 of any kind. And that would be they'd have to use dial-up fucking telephones with, the kind that you put your finger in the thing and go ring, 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 right? This old school manual telephones.
Tyler, will that then open up a market like in India, it was the Indians who did it, but in Russia, it could be the Chinese.
Correct. China would then race to fill in the gaps there, no doubt. So, but it would then create a window of opportunity. I mean, it would create incredible strife. And that momentary window, when all of the modern devices cease to operate, that could be set the stage for a revolution. Now, back to, somebody did raise the question, and I said it's a great question, and I was sincere in saying this. The question of how likely is it that we could provoke Russian citizens to commit a revolution or a coup. And I'm trying to remember who asked the question, and it was a great question. What is the likelihood that the Russians will try and take Vladimir Putin out of power? It's a great question, and we don't need to look very far for the answer. Russia had a revolution, bizarrely named the Russian Revolution, just 100 years ago, where they did take down the who was in power at the time. And so Russia is not unfamiliar with having revolutions, even in recent modern history, in their own modern history. So I don't think that far of a stretch that the Russians would rise up yet again and in the form of a revolution or a coup. They've done it before.
My question towards that would be, if Putin is such the big bad wolf that the media is saying, then why haven't the Russians done that sooner? Because Tsarist Russia is much different than, this Russia today, right? So as much as the Russian Revolution had happened 100 years ago, there were other things that made internally the people discontent with their leadership. So I would ask, in these years that Putin has been at the helm, why haven't they done that sooner?
Because they were
I was thinking if all the
generally revolutions don't happen while life is good. As a domesticated cat, and let's admit it, we're all there, aren't we? And as long as the food is coming in the bowl, people don't create revolutions.
Meow 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 meow.
There's no
That was
tension.
that was my question, Tyler, and thanks for reminding us all about the frickin' Russian Revolution. So I mean,
Yeah, but Tsarist Russia is different than the Russia that we have today. It's not necessarily the same thing.
Putin, right? Absolutely, it's
Robert, you're
totally different.
unmuted, by the way.
Go ahead, Damilari, but I'd like to follow up when you're done.
No, I literally just wanted to tell Robert he was unmuted. It's fine.
So it is very different, but when you have a leader who has killed democracy, who has, as I understand it, after 2014, he managed to assume he came to power and was able to rise with the idea of the economic development message. But after 2014, as I understand it, he's had to pivot into the glory of Russia and reasserting, this history. So apparently this is not new, although he just kind of stated it in more stark terms a couple of weeks ago. So if he's invading Ukraine, I mean, there's absolutely some really great trigger points for the civil unrest to go to different levels, and I would say that nuclear option you're talking about, Tyler, that has a double-edged sword, because that's going to scare the shit out of the other 7 billion people who have cell phones, with regards to the kind of behind the curtain power that those companies have.
Yeah, I
so
wanted to
Fiona
speak.
Hill.
Sorry, Leanne. I just wanted to quickly speak to what David said, and I do believe I slightly agree with Tyler when he says, some of us are domesticated in the way, and we won't necessarily full on revolt against a system that is basically not the one that we want totally, right? Such as the UK, such as in parts America, and so on and so forth, right? But with that, if people aren't in total famine, we look at recent modern history, right, with Japan and China, and then once all of those systems change forth, it shows that maybe domestically Putin has quite a bit of favor, and that could lean towards the 50% of the surveys that have gone. Putin is on the right side of history on this one, right? And if we even go to other modern history, which with other leaders, the Russian intellectual system, right? They have had a big hand in making Russians understand what is going on in and around the world outside of the media systems. So, with that being at play, I'm sure that Putin parlays, not with the oligarchs, I'm not saying, but with the intellectual system, because once you get the intellectuals offside, then there's a whole load more things that are at play there. So, in regards to that, the people are educated, right? I'm not going to say that there isn't misinformation because there's misinformation everywhere. However, these people are highly educated, and just even speaking to the way Russia has handled foreign affairs with other nations, not just with America, right? Russia has some favor, and it shows in the vote in the UN that Russia does have some great favor within other nations that aren't, NATO allied.
Let's go to Leanne, and then I have a point I want to share. Go ahead, Leanne.
Fiona Hill, who has studied Putin all of her career, seems to emphasize the importance of the upcoming Russian election. And she says, of course, these elections are rigged, but it has to be sort of believable. And she sort of paints a scenario that is consistent with what Tyler is saying, that, it could be that if these if the sanctions lead to a situation that is completely unacceptable to the people, that that could influence things such that it isn't believable that that Putin could win the election, and that could change things.
So here's my thought.
He's putting people in jail, though, right? He's
Right.
literally putting people in jail. So
stop stealing my point. Here's my point: is that we saw something. There's a really interesting video clip circulating in the past 24, 48 hours, which is police on the streets of Moscow, next to Moscow's premier toy store, of all places, where they were forcing people to hand over their phones, and police were scanning their phones and then arresting people who had content on their phones that was counter to the official narratives, which is totally worth absorbing here. You now have a level of paranoia at the top that they need to preemptively stop the coup from happening by preemptively thought policing the people who might participate in such an activity. They're going to that length because they're aware that that is a potential scenario that they need to proactively address. To highlight,
I want to reply to that.
Go ahead.
Gonna happen, a coup is gonna happen, and I've just seen, just with my history and history around the world, people haven't been allowed to speak. People haven't been allowed to have freedom of speech, even within like just Black America, which is like more common to everybody in the stage. They had system of speech and systems of understanding where they communicated without speaking, right? So there are ways, if people wanted to have a coup, and such as the Russian Revolution, if we want to keep it strictly to Russia, when it was overtaking Tsarist Russia, they had a system of intellectuals, right, whether we liked what they came up with or not, that were able to communicate wholeheartedly and did the revolution regardless of whether they were allowed to speak publicly or have this particular freedom. So when revolutions are going to be at play, then they're 100% going to be at play. It's not either this or that, whether you're allowed to be on social media, because the reality is, I forgot what it was regarding to. However, someone said it in this chat. Oh, it was regarding to the Tao, right? The Constitution Tao, which is, if you show someone your whole hand, you're obviously gonna get taken off, and then someone's gonna bet $1 more than you have, right? And that's exactly what people do in revolutions. They don't show their whole hand. So socially, when it comes down to it, people are engaged with their system or not, right? So, and there's always contrary systems to the ones that are in power. So you can generally find them if you're culturally and you have a lot of cultural aptitude. And I want to say, unfortunately, I'm not speaking with my total first-hand information, right? I'm speaking to intellectuals that are in contact with Russian intellectuals, not just my let's say my gander towards what Russia is doing. So these people do understand what's happening, and the intellectuals generally say, right, and what their general speech is, understanding what the system they have right today. But I just want to keep my point very fairly simple, which is, people will revolt if they decide to revolt. And they will create a system of speech and a system of leadership that will be contrary to whatever is at play. And it's happened throughout history. So whether they're allowed to speak freely on social media or have news outlets or printing presses, it doesn't matter. It's all the same when it comes down to whether they want to do it or not.
However,
That's a great
So
point.
historically,
hold on,
isn't something
hold on,
different
guys.
now that
I,
the youth?
Hold on.
I'm addressing his point directly because we're dancing on a really interesting point here. I would counter by suggesting that we've reached a new we've crossed
We've crossed the threshold
we've
in all
crossed
of this.
we've crossed a technological threshold, and here and I'm rather than pontificate, I'm just going to read the following headline from the BBC, which just came out. Telegram's founder, who's Russian, who's been reportedly cooperating with the Kremlin historically, that's why he's allowed to operate there, has now made a statement. In a Telegram post, Pavel Durov, who lives in Dubai, wrote, quote, I stand for our users no matter what. Their right to privacy is sacred now more than ever. The messaging app's Russian-born co-founder says privacy is sacred now more than ever. And he's implying that he commits to Ukraine's user privacy. He's trying to assuage concerns of Ukrainians that he's allowing the Kremlin into their chats. And he's trying to say that I promise, I swear that your privacy is sacred. And the
Does he
question
have family?
now, my point is that we can go back and pull up the articles, and maybe we should, about why the friction that used to exist in Russia with regard to the Kremlin and Telegram that magically rather disappeared in recent months. I think there's just cause to consider that the Kremlin has a backdoor to Telegram, and that's able to give it the asymmetrical advantage it needs to squash any revolution. And I think Putin is savvy enough and paranoid enough to know that and have preemptively done that. Now, the next article is also very much related to this point that we're dancing on, which is from our friend Evan from Forbes. It says, Twitter now improves access for Russian citizens with the launch of a Tor browser. So Twitter has figured out a way, because Twitter's unique. Twitter isn't banning itself from Russia. It's trying to make itself available in Russia. Russia's banning Twitter. Twitter doesn't need to ban itself in Russia. Russia's already banning it because Russia
Facebook too, right?
Right. Russia doesn't want what Twitter's got. So Twitter is come up with a clever way to get around that so that Russians can use Twitter despite the fact that the Kremlin's trying to stop Twitter. So following Russia's increasing restrictions on Twitter within Russia, the company Twitter has introduced a Tor service to help circumvent the ban inside of Russia for Russian citizens to use. And this again speaks to the privacy. So now Russians will be able to use Twitter in a private way where even the Kremlin ostensibly will have a very difficult time figuring out who's using it and who's tweeting and who's saying what and everything else. And this gets into the nitty-gritty of the unique technological threshold that I was referring to, whereby we know goddamn well we barely need to say anything other than the word China to highlight this point. China, no doubt, has gotten all up in every crack and crevice of everybody's devices, every which way, 5 ways to Friday, and which would make it ostensibly impossible for China to have a revolution at this point. At the first, there's nowhere you could conversate other than person-to-person physical, and good luck doing that without a camera nearby. And by the way, they'll know that the two of you met. And if they're already keeping a score of how likely of a threat you are to them as a potential revolutionary. That's in part what the social credit system is. It's how friendly you are to the government. Watch the BBC documentary on the social credit system where they talk to somebody who has a very low score. And the essence of the score, one of the biggest key variables that's being measured is how friendly you are to the system and how much of an adversary you are to the system. If you're a political critic of any kind, that's recipe number one for how to get yourself on the shit list. So my point is that we've now reached a point where it might be possible for the first time for places like China and Russia who are aware of these issues, and I assume they are. I grant them the benefit of the doubt that they are. I'm almost certain they are. We have plenty of anecdotal articles that we've discovered over the months that indicate that Russia is very sensitive to what's happening with Telegram. And they don't seem very sensitive right now at all. At all. They seem very at ease with what's going on with Telegram for some peculiar reason. And
so Tyler,
Ukraine is a little concerned with what's going on with Telegram. I want to go to Tom because Tom has a security background. Go ahead, Tom.
So here's the thing. Tor is only as secure as the exit nodes it has. Right. So what federal investigators have done and globally everybody else, what most people don't realize, the only way to properly use Tor is using a combination of VPNs and Tor. The reason for that is the exit nodes, which sit at a bunch of government-funded universities, all it takes is access to them, whether it's permitted or not. So universities are also most known for being easy to hack because they're jump points. So if they are sitting in, say, a slow and low attack and have access to those Tor exit nodes at those universities, they'll have access to everyone that's using Twitter as well. So the anonymity piece would be, relatively mute if they're not using VPNs as well, but I don't know which VPNs they're allowing or which ones are cut off or what. So that's also another key component.
Thank you.
Tyler, on the telegrams, did you say the CEO had made a mention with regards to the Ukrainians about privacy? Did he specifically only cite Ukrainians, or did he include the Russians in his comment?
That's a great question.
I think he was talking about his users, right? Was the keyword the users that he had?
Yeah, users.
He says, I stand for our users no matter what. Their right to privacy is sacred, now more than ever.
So I'd only like to pick up on that and simply say we all need to be careful not to believe that just by not seeing press releases or things come across Twitter that things are not happening. I think that that's one thing that we just need to keep in mind. And does Putin have the power through the Dumas to just kind of do kind of what he wants? Yes. So I would just, we have our own laws with the Patriot Act and things like that I suspect there's just different ways to do things. So
yeah, that's the same thing with Twitter and Facebook, right? And Instagram. It's we understand that they're taking our data, even though they may say they're not, right? But they obviously are, and they do like a whole heaps of it as well. So the reality of it is that there's certain privacies that we do have, right? But that is only to a degree in general, right? And just as someone that's been helping with coordinations on the Ukrainian side, which helping people, let me just say the Ukrainian citizens be able to leave Ukraine is what I'm particularly doing, right? The act of being able to work with those type of freedoms and work in those secure locations, right? As much as I understand that Telegram is helpful, I do still understand, and just as like I said, we understand it with other social medias, is that they are only helpful to a degree, right? You can build your business on Instagram or any other fair platform, but when they have sanctions on them in your country, then it's kaput, right? So we always have to have that understanding that everything we have is to a certain degree. So being on a private company's app isn't a freedom; it's a privilege that they're allowing us.
Yeah. So check this out. So Pavel Durov from Telegram says, in 2013, the Russian security agency FSB demanded that I provide them the private data of Ukrainian users who are protesting against pro-Russian president, for example. So just to highlight the point that if you doubted even for a second that governments insist on access to this information, you now just heard the CEO admit to that. So
our government does the same thing, though. There are instances.
They did it. I said I didn't name countries.
Said governments in general, yeah.
Yes.
Famous example of a email provider who basically had, how he described it was that a SWAT team showed up with a piece of paper and he wasn't even allowed to tell people that they came and visited him. So sometimes the kind of restraint or control they have over even you describing what happened, there are significant legal restraints and provisions there. So it gets quite twisted with national security.
We had a headline 2 months ago with Proton Mail, where the French government put pressure on Switzerland to force Proton Mail to cough up the names of some people in France who thought they were being secure by using Proton Mail, and they weren't. They were taken care of. And that's France putting pressure on Switzerland to put pressure on the guy at Proton Mail. So even by 1 degree of separation, this international pressure can crack. And furthermore, to add even more concern to this issue, Moxie Marlisplain, who developed the encryption used by rival platform Signal, which he also created, and WhatsApp, tweeted that many users thought Telegram was an encrypted app, but that it was by default a cloud-based database with a plain text copy of every message everyone has ever sent and received, meaning, forget it. Government's going to open that shit like it's, Christmas morning.
The other thing, Tyler, you have to look at where Telegram is headquartered and who its biggest investors are,
Please,
and
please tell.
that particular country's use of Pegasus and so on.
Oh, Jesus. Please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it UAE by chance?
Well, I'm not going to say, but you can guess who the biggest investor recently invested in Telegram.
Oh, my God. Tan.
Yep,
I'm
follow
going
the
to Google
money.
the shit, or you can just tell me. Let's go ahead.
Well, it is UAE, and Mubadala is its biggest investor now.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
Tyler, if you go by that prospect, you also have to remember how much DST Global invested in them. Okay,
Oh,
which was Yuri Milner with the
oh, my
backing of
goodness.
off in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everything else.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, Usmanov bought that $600 million yacht from part of his earnings from that whole Facebook IPO.
Oh, boy. There's a Netflix series waiting to happen right there.
But the WhatsApp guy also has a huge yacht. In fact, he has two of them, and I saw one of them this winter.
Okay.
Wait.
So,
And don't forget the people buying up these assets, right? These distressed assets, wondering
Well,
how the money is being funneled back to buy their own assets and maybe wash this whole thing too, right? So who
it's
knows?
it's funny, Heyman, you mentioned this because I was listening to a radio show today in the UK where people calling up and giving their views. And one security consultant who basically provides private security for these billionaires, he said, I wouldn't be buying any of these yachts for sale because those people have unlimited sort of access to power and what they can do. So they're watching who buys their yachts.
huh.
Not to
Okay.
mention the selective sanctions on the oligarchs, right?
Yes, the type of oligarchs whose yachts have been confiscated, you don't want to mess with them.
Right.
Right.
And you
So,
don't know what entities they own that could be used to buy back their stuff too, right? So, and also look at where the money is being parked and what organizations are allowing that money to flow into their countries. That's
Well,
another thing too.
one of our government officials did a tweet yesterday which showed how much the UK has confiscated compared to all the other countries, and it's over $250 billion, right?
wow.
So that means that these guys were hiding over $250 billion in the city of London.
Hmm.
That gives you
Yay!
your own message, who aided that
Hmm.
money to be transferred out of Russia.
London grad.
So, Substack launches an iOS app for reading Substack. That's great. And the SEC charges two siblings with defrauding investors out of $124 million through their Ormeus coin offering, alleging they acted as modern day snake oil salesmen. Better.com lays off 3,000 employees in the US and India, citing current market conditions. EU clarifies that sanctions placed on Russia and Belarus extend to crypto assets as well, as they are transferable securities. And Kuo is back in the news, the Apple leaker saying that the 2022 MacBook Air will have a new form factor, an M1 chip, no mini LED display, more color options, and is slated for production in late Q2 or Q3 of 2022. That's dope. An M1 MacBook Air. But did they not do a MacBook Air with an M1, or did I imagine that?
They did iPad Air.
I thought they did a MacBook Air
They
with.
did not announce MacBook Air or the.
A MacBook.
I could have swore they did. Not the event that was yesterday, but the event before that. I thought the M1s have been in pretty much
Yeah,
everything.
yes,
Yeah.
I can confirm there is the pre last year. I think they launched the
Yes.
MacBook Air M1.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
did. But anyway,
Last
So what people are waiting for is now the M2 version of that
right.
MacBook.
But that's not what this leak is about. The leak is that it's a new form factor and more color options. Who gives a shit about that? Anyway, New York Times says a
and
look,
many girls likes the green.
a look,
Majestic blue.
I like
Majestic
pink.
blue.
a look, a look at the rise of DAOs as they wrestle with infighting and other challenges. So DAOs are starting to get more mainstream through articles like that from the New York Times. And Wall Street Journal says a bipartisan group of lawmakers on the House Judiciary Committee asks the Department of Justice to investigate Amazon and its executives over obstructing Congress's antitrust probe. Okay, to be continued, no doubt. That's interesting. Reuters says they have sources that Amazon is expected to win unconditional approval from the EU for its acquisition of MGM. As Ken correctly points out, this is an absurd waste of time that this is even being pursued in the US. It almost seems suspicious that it's being pursued. Like Amazon is by no means a major player in that space. So Amazon is expected to win unconditional EU antitrust approval for its acquisition of MGM Studios. People with the matter said, yeah, same as Ken made a good argument about here. And then Apple debuts Mac Studio, designed like a taller Mac Mini with an M1 Max or Ultra front and back ports, etc. We all watched it last night. It's pretty cool. And what else do we have? Sources detail TikTok's struggle to moderate its service in Russia as Russia invades Ukraine. In lieu of detailed instructions, junior employees had to refine the rules. From the Wall Street Journal. They say they have sources detailing TikTok's struggles to moderate its service in Russia because Russia is telling TikTok, if you want to do business here, we shut down Twitter, we shut down Facebook, we will shut you down too if you are violating our narratives. And of course, TikTok is based in China, so they're more than happy to try and follow along. And I imagine China might even use their own army of moderators, the 50 Cent Army, to help moderate all of that bad content that hurts Big Daddy Vladdy's feelings.
Yeah,
So,
we want to be careful with calling it an army because, we don't want more friction between our sides and their sides.
right.
Oh, not that there's an ours and them, but yeah, you
But
know what I
that
mean.
is a good observation. There is like over a million
Extremely good, yeah.
soldiers who are engaged in basically misinformation, disinformation. So the theater of war actually has quite a few combatants in the cyber realm.
Yeah, ministers of propaganda, right? And that's what Cheryl was even speaking about with the direct relations to who was it damn, I forgot his name, but the prime minister, the president of Ukraine was talking about, right? So it's giving out particular information that is a bleeding heart or appeals to the bleeding heart, or the people who you want to twist their arm to come and help, in quotes, right? So there's a lot of that that's going on. So it is up to us, right? The people who are so-called intellectuals and the people who are in the positions at play, positions of power, who have the ability to speak out, to actually do speak out and siphon through all of this information and disinformation, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Just a quick note on that. I think one thing that China, for example, implements is, yeah, you get 3 days of venting. People get to talk about this for 3 days. Don't point fingers, propose solutions. And after 3 days, it tends to close off. And I've noticed a similar pattern here in Canada with our broadcasting. The CBC here also does something similar. They keep the forum or the comments open for only a short window of time, and then it gets closed thereafter, so things don't linger around. And I think that that's also effectively a way to silence people's voices. So even though it tends to be in the working for the good of the people, it also tends to create some harm because some issues require more exposition.
Okay. What was I? Oh, I'm multitasking here. Sorry. I need 10 seconds to do a quick little multitask here. Shit. Okay. Next up, I have a tweet from Evan about a new Omicron subvariant that is 30% more contagious is starting to sweep the world. Omicron, what's the number on this bad boy? BA2. 30 even with 30% more contagiousness. It's the hot new Omicron. Forget that old school. Are you still playing with Delta? Are you still on old school Omicron? It's time to upgrade, friends, to the hot new
We
subvariant.
need that Apple graph that shows that it's 33% better than the previous version.
This is the best Omicron we've ever made. And
Yeah. Tyler, we discussed this last week.
yeah.
It's been around for weeks, if not months. There's already BA3 and everything. So it waited its time after BA1 just ceased to have its impact.
For those of us who are hearing this for the first time, can I hear the article, please?
Okay, next up is from Pam. It says new tech cuts years off of DNA sequencing. The Stanford medicine team set a new record for DNA sequencing. They went from obtaining a blood sample to diagnosing an illness in just 8 hours. Here it comes.
Am I listening to a replay? That's also a week old or two.
Adobe, this one from BB, it says Adobe's taking another step into NFTs. Adobe's social network Behance is adding support for the Polygon cryptocurrency platform, letting users more easily showcase Polygon-based NFTs. The next one
Tyler,
is,
have you moved on to the tweets?
we're starting the tweets now, yeah?
Oh, okay, there is another new article regarding Twitter shops. Did you see?
No.
Twitter shops will let sellers showcase more products. I think it's 50 of their products on their profiles. Just now. It's a new article.
Okay, let me
I
see.
thought you'll be interested. Yeah, I pinned it on top of Clubhouse already.
Okay. Facebook announces new features for group administrators, including the ability to automatically decline incoming posts with information marked false by fact checkers. That's very cool. And where's this article, Cheryl? Oh, Twitter begins rolling out something called Twitter Shops. Twitter Shops. What are they going to? What? Are people going to be buying shit on social media websites? Is that what's going on? Twitter Shops is now in beta, letting users link up to 50 items for sale from their profiles. Say what? Say what?
I've been hearing this handsome gentleman talk about it on Clubhouse for months.
Oh, wait. Tyler, are you still selling tech news around the world merchandise?
Let's be clear. Social media is about acquiring clicks and likes and hearts. Why on earth would you want to sell anything on social media? Why? This makes no sense at all. So it's letting users link up to 50 items in their profiles. Let's see here. I got to read this article because, as Eric was pointing out, and as I'm very bad at being sarcastic, I've been saying that this has been coming since Tech News started a year ago. Twitter's rolling out a new shopping beta today called Twitter Shops, which lets sellers add a virtual storefront to their profiles for customers to browse. Notably, Twitter Shops won't actually let you purchase things directly. Instead, the shop listings will link you out to the company's website in an in-app browser to actually complete your purchase. That makes sense because they don't want to do all that heavy lifting. The feature is effectively a more substantial version of the existing shop module that Twitter has already been testing, but instead of rolling out carousel of products, its larger list with a dedicated profile link. With Twitter Shops, your Twitter profile will get a new View Shop button on the top of your profile where companies will be able to list up to 50 products for customers. The feature, which is rolling out today to select merchants and managed partners in the US, is free to use, although only iOS users in the US will see the shops for now. Companies launching Twitter Shops today include Verizon, Arden Cove, the Latin X In Power Podcast, Gay Pride Apparel and All I Do Is Cook. Shops represent Twitter's latest effort to continue to branch out into shopping following the aforementioned shop module and its live shopping experience. So here comes e-commerce on Twitter in a very big way. And you're going to have people making millions of dollars in 2022 on Twitter shops. Guaranteed. Especially once they start optimizing the algorithms for the products versus the buyers. And you're going to have Twitter people with large followings selling shit like crazy because they're going to be making hot ass commissions on that stuff. And this has been going on in Asia for many years. And there are people making billions of dollars doing exactly this. In fact, there was a guy named the Lipstick King who sold more than $1 billion worth of makeup in 24 hours. That's how big this is going to get. This is how thirsty Twitter is to implement what's called social shopping on their social media platforms. All the social media platforms are now going to be doing e-commerce to compete with Amazon because people want to buy shit from people, not from Amazon web pages. And they want the videos and they want the live stream and they want all that shit. And I've done that rant 1,000 times. So I don't need to
But
do
what
it.
does the shoe look like underneath? Can you show me the other side? Can you
Yes.
zoom into the shoelaces?
Correct. And how many do you have right now in my size? And how many days will it take to get to me? I want to hear you tell it to my face rather than try and read it on some website that I don't trust. And I want to see your inventory. Can you please show the camera of how many you have in stock? And yeah, exactly. It's far more trustworthy. People prefer to buy this way. It's going to be huge. It's going to be equal to, if not bigger than Amazon. So Twitter has now tapped into a massive new revenue stream that will likely double, triple, quadruple its valuation. So that's not financial advice. That's just
Hey,
what's
Tyler, can I make one quick comment on this? Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yes, we can,
Hello?
Jennifer. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, not in the middle of nowhere. Hey, this is how it plays out. You have to look at all the other kind of verticals and associated markets. So this morning it was announced that Fundrise invested 128 million, which is pretty big in salt. I think it's called Saltbox, which is for these little e-retailers that kind of like a WeWorks, but for little e-retailers where they get to parcel out um, warehouses. So for that last mile delivery. So a lot of these little e-retailers that were doing the stuff out of their homes are starting to get out in these little mini warehouse spaces. So there's a lot of sort of horizontals and verticals here as well.
Oh hell yeah! All the automation in the factories, in the delivery, it's going to get absolutely insane. From the product manufacturer to the consumer, and automating every step in between, and using the influencers and the social media, social commerce, and as the middle transaction point.
Yeah, and all the upcycling, the Poshmarks and everybody else, all the upcycling and in worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
But
So
normally for this kind of pre-order, people don't expect to get it tomorrow because normally they will say how much will hit the total volume and will deliver from what date. So this kind of purchase is a little bit different.
okay, so the next one is from Thomas Tong from Financial Times. That the headline says the secret U.S. mission to bolster Ukraine's cyber defenses ahead of invasion, as if the U.S. knew that the Ukraine would have to suffer and build up its cyber defenses ahead of the invasion. How would the U.S. know that? How would they? Hang on. Let me go ahead and pin this one to the top of the clubhouse room and follow this thought through with me yet again. Here it comes. We're replacing the Twitter shops link with this new one at the top of the clubhouse room. It says the secret U.S. mission to bolster Ukraine's cyber defenses ahead of Russia's invasion, before Russia invaded. Why is the U.S. helping the Ukraine build up its cyber defenses before it invaded? How would they have known to do that? I'll tell you how. Because the U.S. knew Russia was going to be invading months ago. 5 months ago. How do we know that? Because even Joe Biden was running around willy-nilly, setting up meetings, spending lots of time trying to get Google and Apple and Amazon and everybody else, Microsoft and everybody. They had special emergency meetings at the White House precisely for this and scaling out everywhere to get all the top companies in America working together with Amazon, Microsoft, Google to secure themselves 5 months ago. Why were they doing this? And why are they helping Ukraine specifically, of all the countries that they would want to help with their cyber defenses? Why help Ukraine? Does America give a shit about Ukraine? Why is they helping Ukraine before the invasion? Why would they think to even do that? Because they knew the invasion was coming. And how did they know the invasion was coming? Because they knew they could get Big Daddy Vladdy, the pit bull, whipped up into a fury and a frenzy and have no choice but to attack by simply sending out a few coded dog whistles that they were going to join NATO, which adds a little more credence to my conspiracy theory that the U.S. intentionally provoked Vladimir Putin into the sand trap of quicksand that is Ukraine for Mr. Vladimir Putin.
To use modern parlance, he got triggered. He got triggered and now he's reacting.
He's
But I
not.
think no such agency or nothing is beyond our reach. Some of these terms, I think, also indicate that the surveillance apparatus is quite strong in the U.S. So knowing these things ahead of time, definitely something to keep in mind. But Putin has also been talking about this a lot over the last few years. In fact, I believe 4 years ago, he was talking to Macron on the stage and talking how sanctions against banks were equivalent in his mind to declarations of war. So he didn't see a distinction between tanks and financial weapons of mass destruction. So I think that's kind of the perspective that he's coming at it from.
Tyler, I actually suggested that in Piotr's room a few days ago, and I was just spat upon for using the word provoked, and then I was taken off the stage, and then I was removed from the room, not allowed to enter again. And I just suggested it as a possibility. I didn't claim that was happening. So yeah.
Yeah, that room is heavily censored now. Unfortunately, I think it's taken a turn from open discussion where we're talking about all of the things, which is due diligence. You want to discuss all the scenarios, be very academic about it, but for them to shut down the conversation, that's unfortunate.
By the way, did not the U.S. prior to the invasion start running around screaming, "They're going to invade! They're going to invade! They're invading! They're going to invade right now! They're invading right now!" And at that time, even Ukraine's president was saying, "No, no, they're not going to invade. We don't think they're going to invade. We don't think they're going to invade." And America's intelligence community was saying, "You dumbass! They're here. They come. Get ready, you dumbass!" Did we not do that? Yes, we did.
Exactly,
How did we
Tyler,
know
but
more than the Ukrainians that the Russians were going to invade?
It feels like it was a trap set for Putin, as you say, and Putin fell for it. And now he's going to have, what, 7, 8 years of insurgency, economy deprived,
America is
insurrection in Russia.
so heartbroken over this. We're just
But
so
it's a war
terribly.
machine based economy, though. Similar to ours, I think a lot of the funding and research goes to defense. So it may actually sustain Putin's economy, this kind of move. So it may not be as detrimental or as silly as people think. And I do like the commentary by the gentleman the other day who said, Putin is like a magician. Here's the illusion in the right hand while he's doing things with his left hand. So the Swift system being replaced, that was quite impressive that they were able to do that kind of on the sidelines here. I think that kind of independence is very dangerous because the more independent they become, the more likely they are to be provoked into war. So this isolation, I suspect, will work against us long term. Short term, there are benefits, though.
I
Okay,
was the guy who said that about the magician, although the gentleman part could be in dispute. But listen, there's a great book. It's written by I got the book right here, Marin Katusa, and it takes you from the beginnings of Putin's childhood until he got to where he is at the top. And one of the things that they talk about, I mean, is like, again, he has all these red lines that he's been putting for 2 decades. And he would look like an utter fool every time we crossed these red lines, which we did repeatedly, including like, here's the thing, Tyler, that people don't remember. When the Soviet Union fell, George H.W. Bush basically promised that we would not expand NATO. And everybody was in agreement. Margaret Thatcher, France, everybody. And all we did once Clinton got into office was violate every one of those. Clinton, George W., Obama, everybody. And at some point, Putin's got to be thinking, what do I have to do? He's been restrained. And finally, it's like, if I don't do something, you know, it's like I look like I have no power, no whatever. And so I think that he has been telling us for 2 decades, stop, 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 or else. Well, we finally got the or else. So I agree with you, Tyler. We have pushed him into this.
Let me read this article real quickly. It says, it's pinned to the top of the clubhouse room in case you think I'm adding or removing words. It says, months before the Russian invasion, months before and I said 5 months because that's around the same time Biden was trying to do this in the U.S. to prepare the U.S. Months before the Russian invasion, a team of Americans fanned out across Ukraine. You know, like we always do. You know how we Americans are. We just love hanging out in Ukraine. You know, we send our government, the U.S. Army Cyber Command over to Ukraine months ago. Right. Yeah, nothing weird about that. Not at
No,
all.
that's November. The Russian troops
No,
already surrounding
no. This
Ukraine.
it says
This,
a
oh,
team
sorry.
of Americans fanned out across Ukraine looking for a very specific kind of threat. Gee. Some were soldiers with the U.S. Army's Cyber Command. Others were civilian contractors and some employees of American companies that help defend critical infrastructure from the kind of cyber attacks that Russian agencies had inflicted upon Ukraine for years. The U.S. had been helping Ukraine bolster its cyber defenses for years, ever since an infamous 2015 attack on its power grid that left part of Kiev without electricity for hours. But this surge of U.S. personnel in October and November was different. It was in preparation for impending war. What? How did we know? You know, you know, how did we know? How would we have known that Putin was going to invade back in October? October. Could we have known? Did he tell us? No. You know why he couldn't have told us? Because the FSB, his own CIA, and all of the ministers, everyone in Russia is confirming that he kept this the most top secret shit of all time. That's partly why it's not even going to plan because it was so top secret. He didn't even bother to tell the fucking soldiers it was happening or the generals. Nobody knew. Nobody. He didn't trust anybody to know.
He
Nobody.
kept that closer to chest than a Marvel script, really.
Right. So it's not possible that the U.S. intelligence could have known because his own fucking generals didn't know. You get it? It's not possible we could have known unless we knew we were going to provoke it. Get it? Do you get it now? Is it clear enough
But
right now?
But also, if he wanted to get rid of a bunch of old equipment, this would be the way to do it, to go into a war that may take a long time and therefore spin up the war machine economy, because Russia historically has been an excellent competitor technologically to the US. And I think this momentary pause where we're kind of a little bit confident about our digital position right now with respect to Russia, I think may come to surprise us. So I think Putin's warnings about what's coming next, I hesitate and am very concerned what that could possibly be. So
Yeah, I wanted to add to that is that we should know just based off what's happened in this past week that this is gonna last at least 6 months. Let's just say with the sanctions, right? So we won't even see the ramifications until this time next year. And in general, when you just look at the way Putin has reacted with American presidents and other powers as such, usually springtime or just before spring is where we see a massive change in the way people want to react to, the superpowers was like air out their grievances. But obviously, this is on the scale unknown to this new generation, right? So we're really seeing the effects, but we won't really feel the effects until later down the line.
Check this out.
Um,
Hold this thought. The
mhm.
next sentence, I cut mid paragraph and watch how important the next few sentences are with regard to what's about to unfold in our personal futures in the very near future. Watch this. Because Putin just threatened to retaliate significantly for the sanctions. He said America needs to be on standby for the retaliation that's about to overwhelm you as a response to the retaliation for the economic sanctions. Now, it says, people familiar with the operation in Ukraine, well, you know, when we sent over the U.S. Army Cyber Command and even private folks to go over, and it says, people familiar with the operation described an urgency in the hunt for hidden malware, the kind which Russia could have planted, then left dormant in preparation to launch a devastating cyber attack alongside with more conventional ground invasion. Now, that's super interesting because if we were very specifically looking for exactly that, that tells you that we know that it exists in the US already and that we've discovered it and we know that it's there, and all of that Putin's point that he's making that he's going to unleash some massive fury, the likes the world's never seen in the US as a cyber attack, it's because they have been for years doing penetration testing, vulnerabilities all day long, up and down, left, right, back to front and center. And they've left malware hiding, waiting for that rainy day apocalypse event, cyber attack, the cyber attack to end all cyber attacks. Now,
Yeah,
Like
if the
I
Stuxnet.
genuinely agree with you on that one, honestly.
right, so if the U.S. was able to find that, knowing that they had done that, and suspected that they'd done that, and went ahead and found all of that, and kind of mastered and diffused all of those hidden bombs, and removed them from the basement of the building, so to speak. And then we went over to Ukraine looking for the same things, knowing precisely what we were looking for, as this article points out. Then what this tells us is that Putin's big apocalyptic plans to blow up our building as it is might not work as he's planned. And we may have found all of the fuses to those bombs and disconnected them. And we went to Ukraine and did the same. And that's why we felt comfortable going on with the next phase of the provocation. So, experts warn that Russia may yet unleash a devastating online attack in Ukrainian infrastructure of the sort that has long been expected by Western officials. But years of work, paired with the past 2 months of targeted bolstering, may explain why Ukraine networks have held up so far. Great fucking point. Why is Ukraine's electricity grid working and the key infrastructure is all working? That's really bizarre because we already know that Russia was already trying to do penetration leading up to the invasion. And Russia's at the nuclear power plant that powers some 30% of Ukraine precisely because they want to take the power down. And they were battling over it and they were shooting at it. And the Ukrainians, of course, Russia's saying, turn it off or we're going to keep shooting at it. And Ukraine's like, are you fucking crazy? You're going to blow up. You're going to send a fallout all across Europe if you keep shooting at this thing. And they're like, right, shut it down. And Ukraine said, no, we're not going to shut it down. We need it to power the country. So make no mistake, Russia wants to take down the grid and take down the power. They're willing to risk blowing up Europe's largest fucking nuclear power plant. But yet the grid is still up because their cyber attacks, for whatever reason, were diffused, which they no doubt tried to implement. So this attack that Putin thinks he has waiting for the U.S., which he just today in the past 24 hours revealed in the form of a threat, I don't know that it's going to play out the way that he thinks it does. Anyway, but what this does point to is the fact that the Americans were in the Ukraine looking for the fuses and the bombs in the infrastructure and may have removed it gives you further evidence that we knew Putin was going to attack the Ukraine. But how could we have known when his own generals didn't know? You go ahead and ask your smart friends that question, and I'm curious what they come up with.
Tyler, a short one. One of the things that happened last year or 2 years ago now was that Biden actually told Mr. Putin that you are not allowed to do this against the infrastructure of this type and this type and this type. So they can't do anything that harm that we would notice anyway, would they?
Say this again, please.
Sounds like Stuxnet. Sounds like the next version of Stuxnet is about to drop.
Can you please repeat it, Johan? I was looking at your map that you just shared in the DMs here.
That was really interesting as well. Now, the thing is here that Biden told Putin that you must tell your guys they can't attack infrastructure, they can't attack
In Geneva,
telecom
yes.
system. Yeah. So what
Okay.
can they probably do? Turn off the ice cream machine at McDonald's?
Oh, right. That's a great point. So, for those who don't recall, Biden met with Putin in Geneva around the time of the G7. And Biden told Putin, here are 16 things you cannot do. We will consider it an act of war and we will retaliate very heavily. Specifically, by the way, if you recall, his threat was he was going to cut the Nord Stream pipelines as a retaliation. And he says you can't touch key infrastructure like food, water, energy, finance, and whatnot. And Putin acknowledged that, and Biden softly threatened that he would cut the Nord Stream as retaliation if he did that. And that's where it was left. That was around July, August in Geneva. So, what is this map about? Do you want to share this one?
Apparently, there are some kind of disturbance in the force, and this is not to be a joke. Apparently airplanes they have dependent on GPS, but they also have some other kind of GPS signal they also use. And from Kaliningrad and from Russia, there is disturbances. There is some kind of transmitter that actually screws with the navigation of commercial and military airlines. So during the day, yesterday and apparently today, there have been a lot of commercial airlines that have reported they have something called a squawk, and squawk is the computer they have on board, and they can tell by their signal. This is where you can find them on Flight Radar 24, for example. You can follow your flight coming in from Stockholm to London, for example. And the thing is that that's the squawk signal. But the squawk signal is a bit more complex than that. It's a lot of parameters in the squawk: the height, the elevation, and a couple of other things that's also. And they are reporting that squawk is not working around Kaliningrad. And what I sent you is one of the American surveillance aircrafts that have been going back and forth along the Polish border to our friends in Ukraine. And they went a little excursion almost up all the way up to Finland just to go around Kaliningrad to try to pinpoint where the transmitters are. Johan, done.
Because well, let's finish that thought. Obviously, you left the punchline, which is they're doing surveillance on Kaliningrad to see if Putin is mobilizing anything there, which would be an early indicator that shit's going to get escalated into the Baltic Nordic region. Yes.
Exactly. I did
Right.
leave that part out. Sorry.
You kind of left the best part, the punchline, hanging there, which is the U.S. is trying to figure out if Putin is already preemptively preparing Kaliningrad, which would absolutely be where he would stage his escalation for the Nordics, Baltics. Which, for those, again, Americans are so bad at geography, the Baltics previously were part of the Soviet Union, the Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And they are rightfully very concerned. In fact, as you heard me say a week ago, I have a couple from Estonia staying with me here in Thailand. I can tell you they are having a very difficult time enjoying Thailand, as Estonia, as former Soviet Union country. They're very, very worried about Putin, and they've been trying to tell Finland the Estonians have been trying to warn Finland for a very, very long time to join NATO, saying how bad of a dude he is, and then that's the only justification they feel at this moment, is that they feel justified in trying to point out how untrustworthy he is. That was my conversation with my Estonian friends recently. So anyway, the next article, shall we, is that, and thank you to Thomas Tong for that fantastic article about the secret U.S. mission in Ukraine. The next one is also from Thomas Tong, that a NASA astronaut named Scott Kelly is sending a message to Russia saying your space program won't be worth a damn, quote unquote. Kelly called out the chief of Russia's space program, Roscosmos, on Twitter, adding further strain to the long-standing International Space Station partnership, tweeting, your space program won't be worth a damn. And so thank you for that one, Thomas. And BB found this one from Forbes that Poland offers to give MiG-29 fighter jets to the U.S. to aid Ukraine, but Pentagon calls the idea untenable because you can't launch that ship from NATO airspace. And here's the tweet from our friend Amay that Dubai adopts the first law regulating virtual assets. Virtual assets can be cryptocurrencies such as bitcoins or NFTs. And I believe it's Heyman just shared a very hilarious cartoon in the DMs, and it shows a divorce court proceedings, and it says divorce court in 2030, and it just shows the two parties squabbling over a bunch of NFTs like stoned apes and CryptoPunks, and who gets the CryptoPunks and who gets the stoned apes, and that's divorce court in 2030. It's quite kind of funny. The next one is from BB that a former file sharing site known as LimeWire, oh boy, those were the days, 1999, 2000, LimeWire to relaunch as an NFT marketplace. More than a decade since shutting down, the controversial service was shut down in 2010 following a lengthy legal battle with the Recording Industry Association of America. And now it's rising from the ashes as an NFT platform. And then Lucia shares this one that TikTok just launched its own music distribution platform called SoundOn. SoundOn can distribute music to other music platforms like Spotify and Apple Music and Instagram. This is really interesting because now you can create and essentially publish music on TikTok and then distribute your intellectual property in the form of music to Spotify and Apple Music and Instagram. So you now have an incredibly fluid way to create and distribute to the other major online music platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, etc. And TikTok is now evolving into a music publishing platform. This is really quite profound. And Spotify should do the same, by the way. It's only a matter of time that you'll be able to create music on Spotify. By the way, they bought, what was it, Soundtrap? It's a Stockholm-based startup that's like a browser-based music editor, like Pro Tools, but in a browser. And you can create the music. They already bought the startup. Why this whole functionality hasn't come to fruition yet, I don't know. But in the not so distant future, you will be publishing music directly to your Spotify account, and you will own all of the rights to their music. And Spotify will pay you for every single stream, just like they pay the record labels for all the streams from their artists who don't really get paid and who endlessly complain that they don't get paid because they don't own their streaming rights. But if you publish your own music directly to Spotify, then you would. And you would get paid very handsomely for every stream that you that your fans listen to. So anyway, TikTok is getting into the game as well. That's a very interesting move from TikTok. And then the next one's from Valerie, that the hacking suspected by the Chinese government date at least to May 2021, that the Log4j bug was used in the espionage campaign, continuing challenges to cybersecurity globally. This is coming from the Wall Street Journal in China. Hackers believed to be sponsored by the Chinese government have accessed computer systems in 6 U.S. state governments in a continuing espionage campaign. Say what? What? The Chinese? Whoever would have guessed that the Chinese were trying to do cyber espionage? What? China, really? I'm shocked. I'm absolutely stunned. This is just huge, unprecedented news. And Matt Hughes shares the article from the New York Post that Apple could replace your phone with VR contact lenses. Yeah, it's going to happen someday, but timeline-wise, we're still looking at about 15 years. By that point, we'll probably have brain-computer interface. You won't even need the contact lens. They'll jam the wires directly into the vision processing part of your gray matter. And Francine Hardaway shares this headline that Bitcoin jumps to 41,000 after Janet Yellen's crypto statement inadvertently published early. Gemini's Cameron Winklevoss, who's one of the Winklevoss twins, in that whole Facebook fiasco in the early days. They've gone huge into crypto with their outfit called Gemini. So Gemini said, based on Yellen's remarks, the impending crypto order is positive and supports responsible innovation. And the whole question at hand is America going to be a friend or foe of crypto? And if it turns out that they're going to play nice with it, then boy, oh boy, Bitcoin's going to 100,000 in a heartbeat. And America's making that decision right now as we speak. So is the EU next week. So either the US and the EU, who are both simultaneously finally making their decision if they're going to be a friend or foe of cryptos and Bitcoin, and we're going to know the answer to that very soon, like right about now. And the preemptive early leak of the publish from Janet Yellen gives positive indications that they're going to be a friend of cryptos and Bitcoin and not a foe, and not try to be kind of Chinese-ish about it and, ban it out of existence. If that's the case, you better believe Bitcoin's going to 100,000, if not 1,000,000 in a heartbeat, real quick like. So it's always going to be that way. It was always known it was going to be this way. This day's been a long time coming. It's always going to be, it was going to work or it's not. It's going to be allowed, or it's not. And that's going to have it's a binary issue. It's the value is going to go to 1,000,000 or 0. There's no in between. And the early indication appears that they're not going to try and ban it out of existence. Thus, it will go up very sharply in the very near future. You heard it here first. So we'll see when they do announce it. But of course, they want to jump on the intel so they can be on the right side of that trade, because they've got a lot invested in it, and they don't want to lose all the money they've made thus far. So the next one is from Matt Hughes from the Wall Street Journal, that ride hailers, meaning Uber drivers, must decide who pay upfront for the gas. As gas prices continue to rise, ride hailers must decide who to slap the fees on, the contractors or the customers. Meaning, so Uber as a platform and Lyft and the likes have to figure out who's going to pay the gas bill now that it's significant, or no longer not insignificant. Yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah. So Tyler.
Yes.
On a related note, actually, I was talking to one of my friends who runs a safari company here in Tanzania, and obviously due to COVID, a lot of people have postponed their safaris, their dream safaris. And of course, what you do is don't cancel, but you kind of postpone the trip out a year or so. Turns out, because of obviously a safari, it involves a lot of gas, driving around the Serengeti, hours on end, and he's actually deciding now, because of the rising gas prices, to slap them with a surcharge. Hey, yeah, that safari that years ago in COVID, and I said that you would be able to do it this year. Yeah, about that, you can also add to that a fuel surcharge, because gas prices are rising. So I think we might see a lot of that kind of behavior coming up soon.
Yeah. Jeff G shares this one from the New York Post, that Russian billionaires quietly list the Plaza Hotel for $50 million. What? The sellers? It's an apartment inside the plaza. The sellers are Valery Kogan, co-owner of Moscow's airport, one of the Moscow airports, not the main one, and his wife Olga, and they're selling their apartment for $50 million. Okay, big deal. That's expensive apartment though. Next one is from BB from South China Morning Post, that the Shanghai Data Exchange jumps on metaverse bandwagon with virtual recruitment drive. The 8-day virtual recruitment event open to global talent is expected to result in the hiring of 150 applicants for 9 departments. At the Shanghai Data Exchange, they're doing metaverse job fairs. That's pretty freaking cool, I gotta say. Next is from Kinsha, that Twitter launches its website on the Tor network, obviously to allow Russians to continue to use it, even though Russia's banning Twitter. And BB shares this one, that Xiaomi and Geely propose different approaches for China's EV charging. Okay, so they got to work that issue out, but they will, no doubt. Some standardization there as the two biggest players in the China EV space. And a bizarre new WhatsApp update blocks you from sending some texts. That's fucking crazy news right there. Let me explain why. And thank you to Tan for finding this one. This is a wild one. This is a great share. Mind you, it's fun, so take it with a but it says WhatsApp making it harder harmful or misleading information.
You're cutting out. The music is too loud.
Okay, thank you. WhatsApp, which is ostensibly encrypted, is making it harder to pass or share messages that might contain harmful or misleading information. In an upcoming update, the US chat app, WhatsApp, is expected to set new limits on how many times you can forward a text. Oh, that's why. So it has nothing to do with encryption, never mind. The change was spotted by a website that scours the code of early versions of WhatsApp. Before they're released in the beta version for Android, WhatsApp blocked users from forwarding a message to more than one group chat if you want. Okay, that's not what I thought it was. I thought they were somehow defeating the encryption. They're not. They're just looking at the number of shares. Okay, so the next one is the Henry Kissinger article that somebody shared, which was totally a very good share about Henry Kissinger predicting the Ukraine scenario that we're now witnessing, which we all knew might happen, but we could have ourselves made happen anytime we so chose, and may have done that. Time will tell. So that brings us to the end of another Tech News Around the World. I can't wait to see what happens between now and tomorrow, and I hope you do join us tomorrow for that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a wonderful
Thank you.
rest.
Message Tech News around Africa is on now if anyone's interested in African tech news.